Recording in progress.
Helps if I have the agenda open so I know what I'm saying. All right, good evening. It is Thursday, September 12th, 2024, 7:03 p.m., and I'm calling the Lunenburg Finance Committee meeting to order. In accordance with the requirements of the open meeting law, please be advised that this meeting is being recorded and broadcast over the Lunenburg Public Access Facebook channel and on Facebook Live on the Public Access Facebook page, and will be uploaded to the Lunenburg Access YouTube channel after the meeting. This meeting will be held in person at the location provided on this notice. Members of the public are welcome to attend this in-person meeting. Please note that while the option for remote attendance and/or participation is being provided as a courtesy to the public, the meeting will not be suspended or terminated if technological problems interrupt the virtual broadcast, unless otherwise required by law. Members of the public with any particular interest in a specific item on this agenda should make plans for in-person versus virtual attendance accordingly. The following information is provided for members of the public that would like to participate in the meeting remotely. To participate remotely from a computer, please use the link below to join the meeting webinar. This agenda lists all topics which may be discussed at the meeting and are those reasonably anticipated by the chair. Votes may be taken because of these discussions. Not all items listed may be discussed, and other items not listed may also be brought up for discussion to the extent permitted by open meeting law. Would you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, are there any announcements from the committee this evening? Nothing, Dave? There's no public comment.
Sorry, I didn't get a chance to put my 20-item list together.
The only announcement that I have this evening is that at the select board prior to the select board meeting this past Tuesday, the Finance Committee appointing committee met and reappointed Tom Gray to another 3 years on the committee. His term actually expired on the 30th of this year, of June. However, we were fine. We were not operating outside of the law. There is a carryover period until someone is appointed to replace him. So he is continuing. Ms. Tavares, I reached out. Her term also expired on June 30th, and she has decided to not seek reappointment. So we currently have one vacancy on the committee, and we currently are lacking a clerk. So Ms. Tavares was our clerk. So at some point we'll just have to, when we actually have our other two members, reappoint a clerk for now. I don't know if I haven't heard anything from Mr. Gray as to whether or not he'll be here. Mr. Menard should be joining us late on Zoom, so any votes we have to take will be done by roll call vote. Otherwise, that's all I have for announcements. Is there any public comment from the public this evening? I think we just lost Pat.
Go off again.
Yeah, we lost Pat on Zoom. I'll wait. Is there any public comment from the committee?
Recording in progress.
Excellent. All right. Moving right on, we have, I left them on here, an interim town manager report and a finance director report with how lengthy our agenda is this evening. Unless either of you have anything pressing you would like to do, I'm happy to skip them and I assume we'll get into the meat of them.
I do have two items outside of the meat of
Oh, sure. Please
what we have here.
go right
The first is I wanted to let you know that our outreach in the sewer district has yielded 4 applicants. We need 3 appointees. The sewer commission and the select board will be in joint meeting this coming Tuesday. I'm most hopeful that the The fourth person, we can find a slot for them elsewhere in town government, perhaps the finance committee itself.
Sure.
Secondly, I wanted you to know that I had 3 concerns budgetary-wise when I first came here. The trash contract, however, that has been resolved within budget. So that landmine kind of goes away a little bit, but I have advised the select board that over the coming 3-year period, I believe it is an area that needs an in-depth study as to the manner in which to deliver this service and whether or not to deliver this service, because it is a tax-paid cost, even though a portion of it is on the pay as you throw, that could be provided by the private sector. There are municipal collectors, I'm sure you've seen them, and Waste Management and all the others around town. New growth, I've been concerned about that. However, I'm pleased to report that due to the diligent work in the assessor's office, it will exceed the number that you used in your budgetary projections, which will let us fatten up a little bit the allowance for a maintenance account, which is a little bit leaner than I'd like to normally see. Finally, I'm told you used $100,000 of free cash to balance this year's budget, so I think we need to remember that that becomes a structural deficit going into the coming year. Even if every single expense were to stay exactly the same, you'll have to fill that gap again. Those are the things outside of the memorandum I sent you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. As far as the trash removal, did we sign a new contract with them at this point?
Have I put ink to paper or a script to DocuSign? Not just yet, but it's going back and forth between the councils.
Okay.
I believe it's now before the vendor for their final review and signature. There will be PR pieces in terms of on the website, and I believe they're mailing I don't know if they're going to get it down to postcard size, but they're mailing a postcard type mailer to each of the houses. There will be no change in the routes. They may do them in a different order, but if Monday's your day, it'll still be Monday. And there will be a change in the phone number people need to call for their bulky waste or missed collections, but we'll be getting that information out over the coming days. I've seen the proof of the PR, but it hasn't gone out in the mail yet.
Okay. Excellent.
Who's the company?
Who's the company?
G.W. Shaw and Sons out of Greenville, New Hampshire. They do Townsend, they do Leominster. I can't remember the others off the top of my head, but we did get very good reviews of them.
Excellent. Are you allowed to say how long that contract is expected to be?
Well, it's essentially triple one. You know, it's a 1 year renewable for the second, renewable for the third, and then I believe there may even be subject to negotiation and mutual agreement. I believe there was a 2-year extension in it, but I can't speak for certain. I just can't remember it off the top of my head.
And is it renewable by either party, or do both parties?
Renewable by us.
Only us, okay. So we have the option to say no, they don't have the option.
We have the only no-cause termination, and it is subject to appropriation.
Okay.
They have the option to terminate if we don't pay the bills and do the things we're supposed to do, obviously.
Right.
For a no-cause termination, that's ours.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you. Any other questions on these? All right. In the booth, do we need to get you guys back on Zoom so that we can...
He's working on it, Evan.
Okay.
He's on the phone now trying to get us straightened out.
Okay. If you need me to send you the link again, I can certainly do that as well. All right. Ezzy, do we have anything for the Finance Director report? Excellent. All right. That brings us right into our new business, the interim town manager. So we received a report, or a memo. Let me pull it up. It was extremely helpful, in my opinion. you guys will not be able to see this, but I promise you that we can see it. So the first topic on here, and I sent this around to the Finance Committee as well, and sort of explained it to the best of my abilities. There are two potential topics that we have this evening that are, well, there's two topics that we have for discussion specifically regarding shortfalls or deficits in appropriated funds that the interim town manager has brought forward and has looked for solutions outside of a reserve account transfer. And that includes line item transfers and other locations. So the first one I want to talk about is the weights and measures issue. So if it's probably better, would you like to just kind of give the purview of what it is specifically, since you actually had the conversations with?
Well, let me give you the bad news and then possibly some good news. In Massachusetts, many functions are devolved down to the local level. If you're in New Hampshire, Vermont, Michigan, many other states, the seal that you'll see on the gas pump or the deli scale will be done by the Department of Consumer Protection or the Department of Agriculture or whatever they have. Here in Massachusetts, it's at the local level. You did have an inspector of weights and measures. The salary was slotted at $3,000. However, they've resigned. And you are not able to find a new one. The final solution that developed was to, in fact, hire the state of Massachusetts to do these inspections going forward. I believe I included a memorandum from the state explaining how they do it and a draft contract. This will be a considerable increase. You were paying $3,000. It will now start to cost you $10,000 plus or minus, depending upon the number of devices that have to be inspected. The good news I bring you is that I have gotten a list of inspections that were made, to the best I can tell, in this calendar year, and I may not need as much as I've requested. So
Recording
I'd be
in progress.
happy to answer any issues, questions about it, but I think, Mr. Chairman, we can defer this for 2 weeks so I can get a little bit more time to try to get my hands around it. My apologies, I'm doing my best to get up to speed as quickly as I can. But I will tell you that even if we can skate around this for this fiscal year, you should expect to see a number of roughly $12,500 in your fiscal 26 budget request. But I do think we can place that on hold unless there are questions about my memorandum or the efforts the town has taken.
I'll put up to the committee any questions for this one so far?
How many hours a month does this require?
What they do is they come in and they try to punch them all out. My recollection is that they said we had around 25 or so businesses that they would have to go in and inspect. So you have a Walmart, that's one business, but it's multiple scanners. Same, I think you have a grocery store also, correct? Mm-hmm. So they identify the number of businesses, but it really becomes the number of devices in there.
Yeah.
And they're about $100 an hour, plus or minus.
Do the businesses pay a fee for this?
They do pay a fee, and
Where does that
let me
go?
say that we're going to be dealing with ambulance fees Tuesday night, which have not been changed in 10 years. It is my recommendation to the select board that whether it's a 3-year rotating schedule or a 5-year rotating schedule, you take all of the town departments, break them up, whether it's DPW or it's buildings or it's whatever it is, and on that schedule, every single 3rd year or 5th year, whatever you lay out, in my view, the departments should be looking at what their fee schedules are as part of that annual budget process, as opposed to getting these long bumps. I don't know when these were adjusted last, but the businesses do pay a fee to the town.
And did that go towards the stipend we were paying?
Indirectly, it becomes a revenue on the finance director's books, and then that's part of the tax recap and the building of the budget.
And is this just done once a year?
Once a year, once a calendar year. So they get done in calendar year 24, you don't pay the budget on the bill under the state contract till January or February. So you see those calendar year 24 bills in fiscal year 25, even though they may have been done in a prior fiscal year.
But you still need to appropriate them in your FY25 meetings, one of the
Yes,
two.
exactly. But I would ask that the committee place this one on hold so I could have a little more time. I came to find this out a little late to the game, I'm afraid.
Not a problem.
Are we going to get a breakdown on, how many business, how many scanners, and what this is going to expect to cost?
The state has done their best job as to how they do it. If you do not have this
Well,
memorandum...
I'm curious how we're going from $3,000 up to $9,000 and up to $12,000 when we have the same amount of scanners in town. And
Yep,
they're charging $109 an hour,
yep,
and it's once a year.
yep. If the committee has thoughts on, more economical ways to do it, happy to explore it. I can tell you that in smaller towns like this is not an uncommon problem. They reach out to, the next door town or
It'd be
the city of
shared.
Worcester, and they try to get them to come in and do it. My understanding is that you've gone through that process and were not successful, thus the proposal for using the state.
Maybe we need to increase the stipend.
If I might, the problem when you have someone in a job and you aren't consistently looking at what's going on in the market is when something changes, you get this shock
Yeah,
to the system. And certainly going from 3,000 to 12,500,
yeah. Huge.
it's a shock, but how long had you held it at that 3,000 due to the goodwill of your previous inspector?
And that begs the question, should we be advertising at 10,000?
Or even 6,000.
Or double it, yeah, 6,000, whatever.
See if we can get a shared,
I can try it, but I have to tell you, it'll be an advertisement expense without reward.
how many other towns around us are using the state?
I'd have to check, so this predates me.
Yep.
I can tell you of my last 5 towns, 3 of them are using the state at this point. But I'll be happy to see who else is using it, and happy to explore the other option. But we would need to amend the SAP before I could advertise a job at a salary I can't.
And we have no personnel committee to do that.
Forward.
Well, I think that's an interesting conversation for another day.
Okay.
We can propose amendments, and will be proposing amendments to the personnel bylaw. I think you call it the salary administration
Administration plan.
absent the personnel. And I'll be speaking to some of those in a little bit.
That's good, because I've actually had a lot of questions moving into special town meeting and next year's town meeting if we don't have one, if the charter requires us to have an approved by the personnel committee, if they're going to put a warrant article forward to have us change salary levels or anything, if that has to go through them first and be voted on, or if there is a way to do it without.
That will be an interesting conversation also, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Bernard, I see you joined us. Do you have any questions on this?
Nope, I think I'm kind of caught up, but no, I'm good, please.
All right. I'll put it on the agenda for next week, or next meeting, 2 weeks from now. All right, the next topic is regarding transportation with Mart.
Sue Doherty is going to attempt to join us by Zoom.
She's on.
Oh,
I assume she is.
perfect.
Sue is on. I assume that's Sue Doherty.
Okay. So I asked her to join me because this program is used by the elderly to a great degree also. The MART has had a grant to subsidize transportation for a variety of individuals, primarily the elder, working folks who, may be working hard, but they either have no car or perhaps there's one car in the household and the other partner's working off in Concord or Foxborough or Littleton or Acton, wherever. And juveniles. And currently charge a rate for that, and we enclosed the flyer to show you what it was. That grant expires, I came to learn, at the end of this month. I will be requesting approximately $20,000 at the fall town meeting to continue that program. We have looked at other ways in which we might support it. So we've asked Mark to make their calculations on a slight increase in the fees. I was trying to strike a balance between the users, most of whom are using this because they don't have the resources to own a car or can't drive or something else, and working folks who frankly either don't own or don't have that second vehicle. So we've gone up a little bit in the proposal on the fees to try to keep the price of the town down a little bit, and I tried to strike a balance that I thought was fair to everyone. You have about 400 rides a month that are being given to Lunenburg residents under this program, to 70 unique individuals. And why do I say unique individuals? You may have somebody using it 4 times, somebody using it 3, sometimes using it 1. So we try to look at not only the total number of rides, but the individuals using it to get a sense of the worthiness of the program. You have people using it for medical, for after school, and to get to work. Now, should the town meeting agree that this program is worthy of support, and I would ask Sue to speak to the impact on the elderly, we will have a gap between September 30 and let's say November 30. We've estimated that gap to be $5,000. Happy to talk with you more about the program. You may or may not recommend the warrant article. If it's going to be absolutely zero, maybe we need to talk a little more about my request for a transfer. Don't want to continue a program that's DOA. And I would ask, Mr. Chairman, if you might let Sue Doherty speak a little bit to it.
Absolutely. Ms. Doherty, feel free. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, thank you. Sue Doherty, the director at the Lunenburg Council on Aging. We were approached about a year ago by Scott Rich from Mart on this program, and we thought it was a great idea. And as the interim town manager said, it's for everybody in the town. It works for after-school sports programs to get the kids home. It works for the elderly that we can't transport. For instance, the transportation service will go 20 miles out of town in any direction from the client's home. And we can't do that in our senior van. We do have seniors who ride this van. It's pretty affordable for them. I did email Scott Rich and asked him if he knew how many were elders, and he informed me that they don't keep track of that, of the ages. But when the interim town manager contacted me, and told me about the gap in between I thought about it, and I know that our elders rely on this service also. And I contacted Executive Office of Elder Affairs, where we get our formula grant funding from, and asked them if it would be appropriate if we used money from that formula grant to offset this a little bit. It's not much. I was told it's perfectly fine to do. We can do whatever we want with that money as we see fit. And the way I saw it was I could probably spare $1,000 to go towards that $5,000 gap to just lessen the blow a little bit. I mean, considering we do not know the number of elders that are on there, I think that that's a pretty fair amount. I do know people come in on a regular basis to buy tickets instead of using a credit card or cash, they don't take cash, or debit card with the drivers, and we do a turnover with Mart on those receipts, but it is used by the elders, and it will be missed by the elders if they can't take it. It also runs 5 days a week from, I believe it's 6:30 in the morning till 10 p.m. at night. So it's a lot better. It's just easier for these people to use.
Thank you, Mrs. Doherty. I can offer my own on the opposite end of the age spectrum. We actually just found out about this 2 weeks ago, I think, and my oldest daughter is 13 and now uses this twice a week. So their numbers are going to go up, Mr. Town Manager, by about 8 rides per week or per month. And I can tell you that it's wonderful having her be able to go to the Boys and Girls Club after school in our town rather than have to go to Leominster or somewhere else. She can maintain friendships with the people in town. So I fully support this, but I obviously will open it up to the committee for questions, conversation, comments.
Having worked locally down on Pioneer Drive for 2 years before I retired a year ago next month, there were a number of people that depended on that type of a service to get to work. I believe the ones that I interacted with were probably Leominster and Fitchburg, but the same type of service, and that was the only way they were going to get to work and get home. And the company needed the employees, and the employees needed the income. So I think, on the younger side, people working without the means to get back and forth, it's well worth the money. And they do contribute. The amount is, I don't know how it's calculated, but it's a fair number that they contribute.
The proposal that we have will increase the rates about $1 a ride. And they'll go from 4 to 5, 5 to, I forget exactly what it is.
3 to 4, 4 to 5, 5 to 6.
They'll go from 3 to 4, 4 to 5, and I think 5 to 7 or something. We tried to keep it reasonable because the people who are using this tend to be of lower income, and so we try to be sensitive to the impact on them while projecting a lower number for the town expense. But let me just say on the 5,000, the estimate from Mark was 5,410. So our hope was if this body could see they're very clear to a transfer, and then we did have a shortfall, Sue Doherty could backfill that should we need it, because it is based on ridership.
Right.
And I've just learned of 8 new rides we hadn't been given.
But they're only the $3 ones. She's 8.8 miles.
One other question I do have is, where does it sit presently in our budget as a grant-funded program, and for next year's budget, it's going to have to land somewhere as a line item in our budget?
So it's not in your budget now at all.
Okay.
The grant was received by Mart and has been implemented by Mart with the grant plus the $3 rides that we were given.
Okay.
So next year, where would it go? Well, truthfully, we'll talk about the delicate balancing act of me exiting and the new town manager coming in, who actually does this budget in the midst of all that, frankly, I can see it in the warrant in what I call capital and special articles, as opposed to being in the operating budget, so that it's, because then I have to get it under the Prop 2.5 cap, whereas if I can put it in the standalone articles, I'm working with free cash or whatever we are going to work with. So I think that remains yet to be seen as to where it would land. But were I to be a little bit deeper into developing the budget, my tendency, because you're taxing as your levy limit at present, would be to put it in these capital and special articles.
Okay.
Ms. Doherty?
I just want to add that it's also handicap accessible. You can get a livery service that has a wheelchair lift. So, you know, that's big also, especially for the elders. I mean, we have a wheelchair lift in our van, and a lot of people wouldn't be able to get to where they're going without it. But this Smart Connect service also offers that too.
Okay, I guess the only other question I'd have is the day-to-day operation of the program. Would that still be Mart handling that, or would it be someone on our town?
It would continue as is.
Yeah.
You call Mart, you arrange your ride, and as Ms. Doherty said, you can pay for your tickets at the Council on Aging. Others pay Mart when they make that appointment, as I understand it. So there would be no change in the administrative structure, and Ms. Doherty would know far better than I exactly how that's being done.
Okay.
Yeah, for us, we just call 1 month in advance, pay for that month. As long as you book it, I think, by 2 p.m. the day before, that's all that they really care about.
I only bring up the question so that we know clearly what the transition is going to look like. There's always a concern when we carry a program that's grant-funded, and then we get to this point where, when it was started, some grant programs, we say, well, we make kind of a promise at the beginning that either if we don't have the funding for it, it ends, or if we don't find other grant funding for it, it ends, or we'll evaluate it at the time that the grant funding ends. So it's important that the public know whether there's any other expenses that we pick up to accomplish the transition. And that's the only reason I asked that question.
And happy to put that in the voter's guide, the warrant book, you know, whatever we call it here. Happy to add that issue to make sure people understand no change in administrative structure, so no additional burden to what the town's been doing now, and then it clearly ends June, well, I mean, you might have 15 days into July or something, depending upon where the money sits. But that not unless there are additional funds, which would most likely be town funds, it does end, so that there's a sunset on it, and people know. Happy to put that in the report.
Okay. This is a little bit of a picky question, but I just need to throw it out there. To approve transfers out of the reserve account, it needs to be an unanticipated cost, correct?
Or an emergency, yeah.
Or emergency, okay. I guess we could deem it emergency. My question was coming from, we should have known that this was coming because there's I'm assuming there was a sunset date right from the start on this grant. I'm not trying to push against it, I'm just trying to cover all the points that are out there.
I put it under the heading of unanticipated, and I can sure tell you I didn't anticipate it. I don't know. I can't respond to that, Mr. President. I just don't know.
That's fine, I just wanted to verbalize it, that's all.
I would put it more under the heading of unanticipated.
Ms. Doherty?
When they first came to us, a little over a year ago, the grant started on July 1st, and it was only going to be for a year. And I was a little surprised that it was still continuing on into August, and we didn't hear anything about it. We had no communication, but now we do. So, and you're right, you should be worried about what's going to happen next year. That's it is a grant, and they do go away.
Do we know if there's any, appetite on Beacon Hill to do another grant? Or was this, I assume this was a state grant, not a federal grant?
I would have to ask Mark. I can only tell you that the support for public transportation has not been what I would hope for.
Okay.
Wasn't one of the big federal programs supposed to include transportation enhancements and so on and so forth? I'm just throwing that out as a fictitious, a
You get a
question.
chance to look at the package for the select board Tuesday night, which will be posted on the web, the full package in its entirety. You will see that the state's solution to help us offset ambulance costs is to provide capital. Capital's great, but often at the end of the day, especially at the local level, the real issue is operational costs, especially for communities that are taxing at their levy limit.
Mr. Bernard?
So kind of a two-part question. Do we know if folks are using this to get to Neshoba Valley Hospital, and with it closing, will they then be eligible for Emerson or one of the other
I'm sorry, I wasn't able to.
besides Leominster?
I didn't get it
I
either.
know that answer. If they only will travel 20 miles from pickup to drop off, they won't go any further. We've had a couple of clients who needed to go to Emerson, and what they did was just kind of move themselves closer to the pickup point at somebody's house or something like that, and be dropped off. It's not a perfect system. It's better than no system at all with transportation. There are that have to be worked out.
So I think what I heard you say, and I don't know if I'm breaking up for you, but portions of Lunenburg are within the 20 miles, but others are slightly outside of it.
They won't go outside of it. They won't go a half a mile outside of the 20-mile radius.
Yeah, that's not what I asked. My question is it sounds like portions of Lunenburg, based on what you said, are outside the 20 miles to Emerson, and portions are within the 20 miles?
Right.
Well, may I address that, Sue? It's 20 miles from pickup to drop-off. So all of Lunenburg is covered. And if you're in the Fitchburg-Leominster line, you can go 20 miles. If you're on the Townsend line, you can go 20 miles. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. Pop Google open and they'll go 20 miles.
Sorry, I'm not going to do that, but my question goes back to, do we know if people are using that to go to the Neshoba Valley? Or were they?
Chris, can you hang on one
They
second?
were.
Can you hang on one second? Can we turn the volume up in the booth in the room here for the Zoom callers? It's just a little hard to hear them. Could you try that again, Chris?
No, she answered my question that people were using this to go to Neshoba Valley. Where does the 20-mile come from? Is that a MARC thing, a state thing, or something else?
That was just the rules that were given to us. I guess it's a MARC thing. I don't know if it has to do with the grant. That's what they told us, 20 miles.
Great. I would seek that we do try to negotiate with MARC that we allow everyone in Lunenburg, given the closing of that hospital, to be able to go to Emerson with this program. The 20 is an arbitrary number. You know, anything that ends in a 0 sounds arbitrary. But other than that, you answered my question.
So from this address right here, the Neshoba Hospital is 17 miles. Emerson Hospital is 25 miles.
Yeah.
So it's certainly within, I think, the distance for negotiating, but I agree. If this is helping our elderly community, they just lost access to one of their hospitals.
Otherwise, you'd have to hitchhike out to Route 2 and get
Right.
picked up in the middle of the highway.
Right.
We'll pose the question to Mark, and we'll see what their answer is.
All right, I appreciate that, thank you.
And that's the best I can do at this point. Happy to pose the question and get you an answer.
For FY '26, if we're looking at $20,000 to continue the program to the end of the fiscal year, I assume, correct?
Basically 25.
The end of FY '25. Okay. So would we theoretically be looking at, I know this is an impossible number to calculate properly, but somewhere around $40,000 if the town was then to pick up the subsidy for FY '26?
I mean, we are also increasing the rates a little bit here. My gut is you'd be looking more at 30 plus or minus, depending upon ridership, but that's a crystal ball I really can't answer until we deploy this new.
Of course. If we go by, if we just go by sort of the historical data, I think it worked out to like $4.80 is the average fare based on the numbers that you had provided. So that's on the larger end of the distances. That's not the $3 or $4, it's more on the $5 side. So I think you'd be looking at more on the $5 to $7 side for the increase. So I agree that it would be decreasing. But if we were to use just sort of the numbers that we currently have and the costs that we're currently requesting, that would be about $40,000 that would need to be appropriated in FY '26 if the town was to subsidize the program.
It's really hard to say because with every price increase, there's usually some slippage in usage. That's a way that people cope with price increases.
Okay.
And I couldn't even begin to estimate that right now.
Okay. I also wonder how many people know about it. Like I said, we didn't know about it until 3 weeks ago. And I'm sure I've heard about it, but I didn't know about it. I didn't know what it meant.
I mean, we'll look at the webpage, look at the social media. We're doing our best to increase the information we're getting out to people, and certainly we'll try to push this as well. People are busy. They have other things on their minds, and looking around for these services when they have an issue is not the first thing that comes to mind.
Is it possible to also put a request, or I assume this might be through Mart more, to our local delegates for, just to already get ahead of FY '26's budget for earmarks?
So I don't know what your practice is here. In prior lives, usually in January, we've invited the delegation in, let them speak a little bit about all their great successes, hopes and aspirations, and deliver to them the message that the most important thing they can do for us is bring the check. Now, Tuesday night, we will be asking the delegation to try to assist in funding to offset the operational costs that we think we will incur as a result of the closing of Neshoba. How many things we put on that list, I don't know, but absolutely we would put that on the list for discussion with the delegation.
Would you put this on that list for the select board to put forward, probably, I would assume? Since okay. Since this is certainly one of the services
Please
impacted.
bear in mind, my time with you has an expiration date, so I mean, if I'm not here, I'll certainly leave that on the kind of outstanding issues list for your incoming town manager.
Your last job was what, 4 months, but 4 years and 4 months?
The last one,
Plenty of time left.
yeah. That one was 4 years and 4 months. The last one was, I think, 18 months.
The
But I
most,
have gotten out of 2 towns on time, and you do have a charter requirement.
It's true. Gracias.
One of the things, it's really important to have a list at all times in our back pocket, because the legislative team is noted for notifying you on Monday that we have to have your projects by Friday.
If they give you that much time, Mr.
If they give you that much, yes. Yep. So it's good to be talking about it year-round, actually, and have a list.
I think the ambulance is frankly our highest priority right this moment in an attempt to gain additional funding.
Any other questions regarding this?
So when do we need to take some action on this?
September 30th is the last. We do have one more meeting, technically, but it's right up against the line.
That's really up against the line because, I have to tell Mark and they have to make plans. Are they going to mothball the buses and do they have labor actions they need to take? Frankly, this is a little closer to the deadline than I'd like, but we've tried to act expeditiously once becoming aware of this.
So from what I can see, the issue tonight would be whether or not we want to consider a reserve fund transfer to cover the gap from September 30th to roughly November 30th. And then allow the town to decide what it wants to do at this fall town meeting about the remaining $20,000-ish to carry through the end of the fiscal year.
Okay, now I have my head wrapped around it.
I'm willing to say let's just do it.
What's that, Chris?
I would be willing to say let's just go ahead and do the transfer and move on to other issues in town.
Could I have a dollar amount?
So the request on the memo was $5,000. The request of the actual shortfall based on the funds that MART is providing is $5,400. And then the Council on Aging has $1,000 in their budget that they can finagle to cover it if it's overages. So the ask is for us to transfer the full $5,400.
Just 5,000, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, just 5,000, and then if it is $400, okay. If it comes up to the $5,400, then we take it out of the Council on Aging's line, okay. $5,000 with a increase potentially of 1,000 from the Council on Aging if it needs to go that much higher.
Okay, if there aren't any other comments or questions, I'm ready for the motion.
I would happily entertain one.
I move that we authorize a transfer of $5,000 from the reserve account for the purposes of covering the shortage on the MART transportation program.
Can you just amend that to say to the Council on Aging?
To the Council on Aging.
Okay.
Second.
All right. Motion has been made and seconded to transfer $5,000 from the reserve fund to the Council on Aging to cover the gap of October and November's MART transportation. Is there any discussion before we take a vote? All right. It is a roll call vote. Mr. Menard?
Aye.
Mr. Passios?
Aye.
Ms. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Simeoni?
Aye.
And an aye from myself. We are unanimous.
Thank you for your support.
Thank you very much for bringing this forward. And thank you, Ms. Doherty, as well, for all the help in this one, of getting this started. Like I said, I honestly didn't even know it existed, so thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Aye.
Okay. Next up, we have, so I've added it in here. It is a topic that I don't know what it is specifically, but the interim town manager asked to bring it up, the future capital projects without borrowing, sort of just, I'm assuming, a high level. This is up and coming.
Very, very high level. I wanted to let the committee know that I will be looking at your charter in the next couple of weeks. I believe there's a 5-year financial projection I need to produce. I'll need to look at some history, see some trend lines, and to talk with our counterparts at the school committee, the school department. And we will produce, I can't remember when that's due to you. Perhaps
I happen to have
someone here can
that.
help me on that.
It is on our calendar. So if we decide to stick with this calendar, the 5-year financial forecast to the Select Board is scheduled for the 14th of January,
Oh, yeah, we could,
and then on the 16th of January to the Finance Committee.
yeah. Well, I don't know how sophisticated or fancy it's going to be, but we will produce something, and it's only as good as the assumptions we give you. You'll decide if the assumptions are totally unrealistic, throw it back at us, and we'll rework it. After we have a discussion about why we use the assumptions we used. But within the operating budget itself towards capital, you only have a delta of about $160,000 you can devote to future borrowing, to a new bonded item. Everything else in your debt budget was incurred under debt exclusions. So as those go down, they don't open up anything for you at all. They provide some relief to the taxpayer. And they're a little bit misleading because when you buy that fire truck, when that bond issue's done, guess what? You need a new fire truck anyway someplace. So based upon some prior plans, that number will be somewhere between $0 and $160,000. We are on track to have free cash certified in plenty of time for the discussion on capital. I don't want to give a guess, but the capital plans will not be extensive. And I think it's something the community really needs to start to think about, especially, in the budget task force. I just wanted to lay that out there just for people to start to think about, especially given the fact of most of your capital projects are currently woefully underfunded and they are unlikely to achieve the work that you initially had hoped they would. So I think you've got some challenges, and how you want to meet those challenges, it's your town. But I think it is something you need to have a very serious conversation about. And I just wanted to lay it out there.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Mr. Menard, do you want to go first?
Sure, just on that point, do we have estimates on each of the capital projects as to whether they're funded properly or how underfunded they are? And when can that be presented to us?
I think I saw Chris Ruth at the drugstore buying Excedrin for the headache I've been giving him on this issue. The only thing I can tell you right this minute is we can project with a fair degree of probability that virtually every account is underfunded. To what degree it's underfunded, I can't tell you right now because we don't have a cost estimator on board. Setting that aside, it's my view that the fastest way to find out is to get some of the projects out to bid. So whether it's ARPA and the library project, or it's this building and the roof, or the Ritter building, where I think, we need to pick what our priorities are. I've suggested to Chris that I would like to meet with him each week and push some of these things along. And if we can get enough of them out to bid, we can get a more realistic handle where we are to either backfill them if there are any ARPA funds that are loose on the table, or discuss with the capital committee how we backfill these projects. That's the best I can tell you tonight.
One other question, TC Passios, how many capital projects remain open for TC Passios?
I'm sorry, I heard TC Passios and then I didn't hear the rest.
How many open capital requests are, including on?
Don't know about open requests. My understanding is there's $300,000 towards that project. You have, I can't remember the numbers completely, you have about $100,000 here for roof, masonry, and some other things. You have around 250 plus or minus at the Ritter Building. And I have sent out an email today after discussions with Chris to include our finance director, representative from the schools, Municipal Building Design Committee, myself, and to talk about, here's the money we have, where are we headed long-term, what are we going to do? Because we need a short-term plan as well to protect these building envelopes. The other issue I need to make you aware of is that you're running TC Passios without an actual operating budget. So you're taking in whatever you have for, and please feel free to jump in here, but again, I'm the short-termer, I can take the hits. You take the revenues in and then you pay the expenses out. Well, that account is currently around $90,000 in the red, and the ink is growing. So what happens is, when he puts his balance sheet together, he's going to show that effectively as a liability, and that reduces your free cash by that number.
Comes off the bottom line.
Comes off the bottom line. My biggest concern is, I always get a little nervous when we're on TV, but I don't think anyone from DOR is watching this. You know, but my biggest concern is that's not really how you should be going about doing things. And at some point, are they going to say, what are y'all doing up there? So I'm hopeful, and I think we talked about trying to get everybody together the week after next, you know, to roll out some plans and talk about what's the school's long-term plan and how can we use these dollars most effectively to protect the building envelopes in the short term while whatever the long-range plans are developed. Is that any way towards answering your question, Mr. Menard?
Yeah, no, it starts to. So one more question, or I have like 2 more questions. Has the schools been paying what they had previously agreed to towards the maintenance of TC Passios as the primary user of TC Passios with the extended day program?
The program does pay some rent. What the prior agreement was, what exactly they're doing, I really won't know till we have that discussion.
Good. And then the next question is, in your experience, what is best practice related to reviewing projects, capital projects, once they've been approved with the finance committee? Because we kind of approve them, and then they just kind of go off our radar screen, and we occasionally hear of overruns and potentially they're not needed, and or maybe in a rare room, some underruns.
In the world that I come from, and I think your finance director is working towards this, you would get I would get a budget versus actual, or the town manager would get a budget versus actual. And remember, we're on cash basis here. We don't want to go to modified accrual. Not on a daily basis, we don't. And I would review that and ask my questions, kick it back to the finance director. He'd reach out to those department heads and get the answers, and then we would provide that to the finance committee towards the end of the month. And once a quarter, I would send the finance team into the select board and report, and you would track it through those monthly reports and those quarterly reports. That's what we've done in previous lives, and I think that's what the finance director is trying to work his way towards.
Okay, I appreciate that. I think that is needed, and I don't think we're that happy. So that's all I have. Thank you.
It's that monitoring, tracking, and spending that hasn't been happening and been reported back. So the capital projects, as they occur, they should be reported back to the capital committee as well as the finance committee and the select board as to what's completed, what's not completed, where are they at, what's stalling. I think that has not been happening.
The only time we get
I've been
the,
here 6 months, but from what I've seen, that has not been happening unless it's coming up to the next town meeting for the next project.
yeah, all I've ever seen since I've been on the committee is we see it in the annual town meeting in one bill where we reappropriate capital funds from previous years that were not spent, but we don't have any idea as to what, other than, I mean, we could look at the code and go back to the year that it was actually appropriated and see what it was, but we don't have anything beyond just, we're taking $876 from unexpended capital and moving it over to here for free cash.
Well, my experience with the finance director, and I would say this whether he's here or not, is you got a real good hire.
I agree.
I'll collect that dinner later. That said, he has been shoveled against the tide to some degree, and the accounting offices, the finance offices, frankly, could probably use some more hours in there. We're asking our people to try to do more work than they can do within the hours they have. And I think there's some units that are going to have to be beefed up over time if you want the kinds of financial improvements that we may have experienced in our prior lives. Some of it's simply systems and expectation, but some of it is also resources are needed in some of these units.
There's been a call a number of times over the past few years to take all the town employees back to a 5-day week. I think that really needs a strong look over the next year or two. You know, we say, well, we get the excuse we don't have enough time to do all the work. Well, you're also working 4 days a week with full benefits. So I don't know what the numbers are to go to 5 days a week, and I'm sure there's some collective bargaining in there that will maybe play into it. But I really think over the next year or two, that's going to have a real good hard look taken on that, because as we've had some rhetoric over the past couple of months about the fact that Lunenburg isn't the little farm community it used to be. We're not quite a city yet. We could be. Our population is on that cusp, but I don't think we want to go in that direction. But we need to start acting like a good-sized Massachusetts town, not a little bedroom farm community.
I would encourage you to look at number of hours for full-time employees to work as opposed to numbers of days. So there are certainly communities that are at 37 and a half and 40, but they may be on a 4-day week, or they may be on a 4.5-day week. And frankly, that longer window on the weekends is it's a good recruiting tool. Yeah. So I think you look at what's the workload. Frankly, right now, I think most of the full-time employees are at 36, but you also have some at 32. You're paying those full benefits. That's a much larger discussion than you want to have tonight. But I would look first at the number of hours and how you distribute those second.
And the key to all of that working is the fact that productivity needs to be, the problems blocking productivity need to be corrected. I'll just leave it at that. I talk to employees in this town 2 to 3 days a week when I'm in town. I have time to move around the office to office, and I haven't heard as loud of complaints about Munis just recently, but I'm in there at different times of day. But they have time to talk to me because they're waiting for Munis to do something.
Perhaps they just enjoy your company.
Well, consider, Dave, that you're the reason
Well, they're using the excuse they can talk to me that Munis software is frozen, but I get it.
I understand what you're saying, and we're trying to take some proactive steps. The finance director has just engaged a user group to talk about, do we renew, do we switch to another software? The network administrator, the one who's filling in, Kara, has worked with Suzer to revise. You know, we had this ticket where people would call Suzer, then Suzer would go to Munis. We've kind of cut all that out, and we have some listening sessions coming up next week. Next week with our employees to hear their concerns and suggestions. So we're certainly trying to do that in a continuous improvement effort, Mr. Bassett.
I want to add too, this isn't the administration telling the employees this is what's happening. We want to make sure they're engaged and involved, so we want their opinion. Should we switch? What do you feel is lacking? Is it our server capacity? Should we move to the cloud? Will that solve our issues? You know, this isn't, we're telling you what to do. Join us, help us find the answer. We want to make sure everybody's included. It's an inclusive environment. It's not dictatorship. Just want to make sure that's clear.
Well, just with one minor exception, at the end of the day, I have to put my name on the memo, so you have to be comfortable.
The only pushback I've heard, and it's from a specific group within the employees, and that is that the transition is just miserable. Well, I don't know if it has to be miserable or if that's just the nature of the beast, but if we're confident that once we get through the transition, that life is going to be much better, then that's a decision our person at the top needs to make and just do it.
I can assure you, whatever software program we're using, someone will be unhappy with Elementor.
Right.
As long as it's 51% is happy.
We'll do our best, Mr. Bassett.
Yep. That's all we can ask.
As far as historical forecasts, there, just to make you aware, we did not receive one for FY25. The former town manager was unable to get that done before she left.
It'll most likely be in an Excel spreadsheet.
She wasn't able to put it together.
Oh, okay.
So to my
I
knowledge,
think mine will most likely
Of
be in
course.
an Excel spreadsheet.
as long as it's locked and uneditable. For us. What can we do to kind of help the process for you in your eyes, since this is kind of this is certainly a new take or a new look at capital?
Well, I think that in terms of capital, there's really not much more we can talk about tonight. The capital committee we have, I got to give credit to Muir Harmon, is it? I work with Peter Beadsmore, Chris Menard. I've been in on these conversations, and one of the things that Peter Beadsmore spoke with me about was a desire to have better presentations, more uniform. Chris, do you want to speak to this?
Yeah, I mean, it was under the guise of capital planning in this instant, but, honestly, we've talked about it within finance as well. Getting a little bit more to the point on things and tracking trends, maybe some years in the rears and what the 5-year forecast is for capital plan is probably more on the showing that vision of where we are today and where we want to be in 5 years throughout the presentations so that we understand the capital plan. More like I'm expected, I see at work in a professional environment at work, that kind of thing. So, and once we have a plan in place, it becomes a little easier to say year to year, I'm tracking with the plan or I'm not tracking with the plan. I think police has done a good job of that historically. You kind of understand what their staffing plan is, when they need vehicles, et cetera. Some of the other departments are a little tougher, like DPW and facilities. But the idea just being, let's have some uniformity to things and consistency. And we saw some of that last year, right? We talking about the town manager's budget here, or the budget I want, et cetera. So that's the idea behind the presentation. And then roll it out through the other organizations.
So in speaking with Mr. Beardsmore, he spoke of the differences in the presentation, both in terms of the documentation of the numbers, the impacts on operating costs, and so on and so forth. So we struck upon the idea of having the best presenter of the group mentor the other department heads. Unfortunately, that was deemed to be Chief Gamble. And the rascal's leaving us before I even truly got to know. So the thought was then to task, subject to their agreement, one of your staff that seemed to be well respected, and a lot of people thinking they've got some real room to grow, and that's Muir Harmon. And he's agreed to take on that task. He'll be meeting, has met with Mr. Beardsmore, Mr. Menard, and he'll be making a presentation to the various departments. And we think this is an exciting opportunity for him to grow as an individual, to mentor department heads on this aspect, and to improve the presentations and the information for the capital committee. And I just want to commend that department head for having such a willingness to step up to the plate and stretch out of what you might think of the job as the head librarian would be. But we're hopeful that this will yield some improvements in the planning, and I'll leave that for the planning committee, capital planning committee, and you all to decide at the end of this cycle.
And he was very eager to do it and very positive with it. And Chief Gamble did say that if he gets a dog, it makes everything easier.
All right, any other questions for this one? All right. Moving on to our next topic. Review the budget process and suggestions for improvement. So I had, let me share my screen with that one. So when the former town manager, before she had left, she put together a schedule to get us through the fall and through annual town meeting. And I've shared this with the interim town manager, and there was a meeting that actually took place on the 9th of September, just a few days ago, that was geared towards sort of the organization of sort of stepping back from deadlines for whether they be statutory deadlines with our charter or post office deadlines or printing press deadlines or whatnot, to step back to say, all right, what's our drop dead dates? And I spoke as well with the superintendent to try to get a little bit more time at the end of our budget season to give us an actual meeting, or actually in this case 2 meetings in between, or 1 meeting in between our public hearing and when our actual annual report is due. And so what I have done is, on this document, anything that is in red is a change that I have made from what the town manager had actually started with. And it doesn't do all that much, but effectively, and initially the school department being Dr. Burnham, the school committee has not the interim town manager has not agreed to this yet. So this is just sort of the framework that we're starting from, and then we can obviously have the discussion as to where we want to go from here. But our sort of drop dead date is historically the first Tuesday in April, because that is the day that we need to get our finance committee report to the town so it can make it into the printed warrant. We have missed that 2 years in a row. 2 years ago, I take full responsibility. Last year, it was a little bit of a kerfuffle year. But I think it should be printed in the warrant, and I think there needs to be a meeting in between our public hearing and the date that the report is due for us to have come back, talk about what took place at the public hearing, give us a week to actually think through it, already have something workable, and then kind of just finalize it and vote on it that meeting, and then we can actually put it forward that day. So to do that, I have moved our usual kind of Wednesday, Thursday 1-2 punch at the very end. I've gotten rid of those 2 meetings as budget review meetings and moved the Wednesday meeting the week earlier. So we have our 1-2 punch on the 12th and 13th instead of the 19th and the 20th. And the school department has agreed, the school committee has not yet agreed, that they will shoot for presenting to us on the 13th, ideally with having a school committee approved budget on the 12th. So it, in theory, would be a finalized budget. And that would allow us then on the 20th, a week later, to have our public hearing, a full meeting with the public hearing, to vote on warrant articles, to talk about the report, and we would still have the week after the 27th for a follow-up public hearing if needed, and we could actually finalize the report and get it submitted for Tuesday. So this compresses the schedule only with, I believe, 1 meeting, if I'm not mistaken. 2 meetings. All right, I apologize. 2 meetings here. So working, thanks to Mr. Menard's suggestion, I arbitrarily moved Monty Tech. I have no idea if this is reasonable, but based on our conversations we had, I believe at our last meeting, Monty Tech basically just hands us a bill and says, here you go. And there's no reason why we can't have them present earlier, to my knowledge. They have the numbers pretty well in advance. They already kind of know what they're going to be doing. So I've just arbitrarily moved them to the end of February. Whether it's the end of February, the beginning of March, it doesn't really matter. But I think it's a short enough presentation, we can kind of just tack it on to the day that we either have the police and or the day we have DPW and facilities. On that March 12th day, I'll make this even larger, it's kind of tough to see back there. On the March 12th that I had added, I took the standard administrative unclassified debt service and moved that to that date. I took sewer and PAC and other moneyed articles and also moved it to that date. So that's usually a pretty quick series of meetings or presentations to go through. And then the town manager had actually already had the school committee or the school department presenting on March 13th. So I have not moved that. That was already sent out. And then we had, based on our discussions that we've had throughout the summer, we need to consider inviting the Cemetery Commission for a presentation and the Capital Planning Committee possibly for a presentation as well. But those were the other 2. We had talked about it.
Cemetery Commission, just so I have in my head for...
So we have a better understanding again as to sort of now that we sort of know how it works, it is still it's a lined item that is in the budget that is not a super small lined item. It's a larger line, I believe, than the Council on Aging. So since it is a larger line, it makes sense to have them come through and kind of present to the Finance Committee as well. Because they're not exclusively working on enterprise budgets. They are working on appropriated funds.
Right, as well as the 10,000 that they move
Correct.
into their other account. Okay.
Correct.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah. Okay. With all of that said, Mr. Interim Town Manager, have you had a chance to look over this to kind of get an idea as to what it looks like from your end? I know you had already sent around some emails with times and working backwards, and I believe this still all falls within sort of that threshold. And I think your microphone is off again. You have to restart it.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
So, working backwards, Your annual town meeting appears to be on May 3rd. I need a minimum of 23 days to put the report together, and not to put it together, but to get it to the printer and get the proof back, change back to them, how much do they have in the queue, making sure that I've got 17 days for it to go out in the mail. Your charter says 14, but I need to make sure it actually gets in the mail on time. So I need a minimum of 23 days to have a final warrant and report.
Those calendar days or business days?
Those are calendar days as I laid it out. Now, that means I need to have a final warrant, a final report. Tough for y'all to do final recommendations reports till you have a final warrant. So I would be, looking at the select board of, can I see that calendar? I'd probably ask them for if I were here, I would be looking at March 18th for them to approve a final warrant, which would then give you a chance to complete your final review, and we could work out, what is this article all about? I think that each proponent should prepare that and have that in the warrant materials that come to you. So I just give you that as a framework, and I won't be here, but I keep saying that. I'm sure that Bernie Lynch is going to do a great job for y'all. He's really terrific to work with. The other piece is, if you're expecting me to present a balanced budget, and I don't have the school budget until sometime in March, I cannot present you with a balanced budget. And we do that either by, we know what they have, and we figure it out, or it was always kind of nice fighting with the regional school district. In the one town in which we had an actual school department, we gave them their number, and that was it. We said it, and then the ball got bobbed back and forth across the net until we kind of agreed it. But given that the schools are under our tax levy cap, that is something we need to work through with the schools as to how can I deliver a balanced budget if I've still got a number out there.
So,
Let me just say, that's always a problem in every town. So again, you present numbers with certain assumptions.
So we have historically had trouble with the health insurance line. That's one of the biggest ones that the school department, and since they are the largest employer in the town, they have kind of the biggest chunk taken out of that. So that is a large piece. However, after going through my emails and talking to Dr. Burnham, we get in the fall, late fall, early winter, we get kind of the worst case scenario estimate. I believe it was 10% was supposed to be FY25. Then the MMA conference comes around.
Mid-January. This
year it is the 23rd to the 25th. This past year, or this past January, on the Thursday at the Maya lunch, they report out sort of the updated worst case scenario, and it went from 10% to 6.7%. Then I believe, I can't believe I didn't write it down in my notes. I believe it was February 10th, we actually received the final number of 4.something%, 4.5%, something like that.
Depending upon how much of a nuisance you are and your working relationship with your Maya rep, you can sometimes get those within a week or two of the MMA meeting.
So we were close to that. But we, in theory, should have, by early February, kind of the finalized number. Or if you choose to use kind of the worst case scenario at MMA, which is likely to be a less worst case scenario, you can use that number as sort of your, this is how bad it's going to be, and then if it gets better, we can kind of fix that as we get to the finalized number. If that does happen, looking at school committee meetings and times that they have, they are currently scheduled to have a meeting on the 22nd of January, so right before MMA, so they will not hear about the updated, they will not have a chance to discuss any updated values until February 5th. And then they have a regularly scheduled meeting on February 26th, March 5th, and then March 19th, which they're considering moving to March 12th. So they would have theoretically 4 meetings, 3 meetings including, and then a 4th meeting to have a vote on their finalized budget with updated numbers. So if we don't hear about the final health insurance number until after the 5th of February, they would theoretically have 2 meetings to kind of finalize the budget and vote on it at the 3rd meeting after that. If we don't have 15 budgets flying around, the superintendent does feel pretty confident that she at least should have kind of a grasp as to what the budget will be. She and I discussed whether the idea that we need to go to town meeting with expected absolute values versus best estimates, given the information we have at the time. I mean, the annual budget isn't even finalized until July, so we're still getting changes to numbers that we've appropriated in April or May. Sort of, do we kind of draw a line in the sand or put a sort of a benchmark to say, by this date, this is the expected level of certainty that you're going to go with, and that is what you sort of work under the assumption of, and then obviously if something changes, large changes that comes along after that, you can try to absorb it as best as possible. But that way you actually have numbers to go forward and you have time to go through the process of finalizing the warrant. So all of that together is basically, it's going to be difficult if we don't have some wiggle room, I think, to get a school department budget that's approved or at least discussed and voted on by the school committee much before the 12th of March, it seems, which would give you in theory a month.
I will leave local practice to you all. I've noticed that the vast majority of your warrants are to see if the town will appropriate, raise, borrow a sum of money to do something. The worlds I come from, there's lines in the sand and there are real numbers in the warrant. The only thing I do want, and I'll leave that to permanent town manager. The only thing I want to make sure everyone understands is that the town manager will be very challenged in proposing a budget for the town side of the house that, together with the budget for the school side of the house, is balanced within the levy limits of Prop 2.5 if that budget remains a substantial work in progress. I'm sure that the superintendent understands that concern. And you're right, you have to you look at what MMA is telling you, you look at what your own trend lines are looking at. If you've got a good working relationship, but I think you have enough souls insured where you can get actual experience data, you make that guess and you hope it's right. And if it's over, you sweep it into overlay surplus. And if it's under, you cut the amount you set aside for overlay surplus, and you do the same thing with House 1. You'll have it by January 15, 17, 18. Those are the numbers. The odds that they're going to change considerably during the legislative process, yeah, they're going to change. Are they going to change considerably? No. You can go to the bank with House 1 as a general rule. It's never failed me yet. I don't think there's ever been a year in which the legislature appropriated less local aid than the governor has asked for. This year, there's $31,000 we'll talk about, the extra that's coming to you. Would you wait around for that number to settle your whole butt? No. So, certainly, I'm sure that I will do my very best to be collaborative with the school side of the house as this evolves. I'm sure my successor will be as well, but we need to understand that without the numbers from both sides of the house, it is impossible to present a balanced budget.
Mr. Menard?
Sure. So just first of all, I very much dislike the sum of money in the article. I'd rather see the actual value of that. That's just commentary. I think on this schedule, the only thing I would like moved is the Finance Committee report for warrant to the BOS office to be moved after the 4-3 meeting. Because I think we need 2 full meetings to review it and then finalize that warrant. So I think that would be the 4-3 meeting and the 3/27 meeting, coming out of public hearing in votes on warrant articles.
I will add to this schedule that you provided me what I think are the drop dead dates on our side administratively to get the booklet out in the mail. Great charter revision would be to send a postcard. It's available at a web link in the library and town hall. Save you a lot of money and save you a bunch of time too. But I will add those dates and get that to you within the next day or two.
Okay.
I would like to talk about the drop dead dates going forward into the fall town meeting also though.
Oh yeah, we're already talking. This is the more pressing one, is the fall stuff. Just really quickly, Chris, I think that's fine. I agree as well. If the finalization to the select board is sort of the drop deadline is the 18th. I think if we were to push ours to the 4th to get another meeting in there, I would have to imagine that wouldn't be too terrible, but I do look forward to seeing. Yeah.
I just think we need 2 full meetings after the public hearing. Meaning if the public hearing moves a week, we move a week as well. And that's happened in the past.
Agreed.
Now, if we didn't have, public meeting laws, maybe that wouldn't be the case, but we're pretty bound. Our hands are pretty bound on our ability to do that in one meeting.
All right. So before we move on, I'm going to switch it around just a little bit. So I put together a template. But I think we should probably discuss the fall town meeting first before we discuss the springs, the annual town meeting budget template, and the prudent investment warrant article as well, since we do have the town manager and the finance director here. So let me shift gears and pull up fall town meeting. Perfect, it's still up there. Okay. So on the memo from the interim town manager again, and this has been circulated, these are what we're looking at currently. So there's 2 pages here. If you'd like to, Mr. Interim Town Manager, please feel free to take us through these.
The timelines or the potential articles?
If you'd like to start with timelines, that's fine.
So the meeting itself is on November 12th. At this point, I'm looking at needing your final report in hand, the booklet in hand, by the 24th of October. I don't know what your regular meeting schedule is. Is it 1st and 3rd, 2nd and 4th?
2nd and 4th.
Oh, okay, so I would need that the next morning.
So
My intent would be to have the final warrant to you by October 17th.
we currently have. So we have a meeting on October 10th and then October 24th. So that would give us a week to kind of digest it and then discuss it on the 24th.
You'd have the draft that was going to the warrant
Yep.
for the select board for the 17th. Happy to attend your meeting to review it with you
On the 24th?
on the 14th. By the time we get to the 24th, it's too late. I
Okay.
need your report the next morning.
We don't, our report or just our votes for, because we don't typically provide a report for the fall town meeting.
Okay, so we could have everything done except for your vote, your recommendation. So we have a warrant that's a standalone document over here. Then we take the warrant, which has the vote required, your recommendation, the selectman's recommendation, and then it has a brief explanation of what each article is about. The kind of language that Mr. Passios asked us to add to the transportation grant. And that we can have out ahead of time. So happy to come in on the 24th if you think that's the best use. Happy to come in and present on the 10th if you think, whatever you think is the best use there. Happy to come and chat with y'all.
Well, you'll have, so the warrant closes in 4 days.
Yes, sir.
So that we'll have, there'll be ample time for the select board to go through and choose what they're going to be putting on there. So they should have draft versions available by the 10th, I would imagine, correct?
By the 10th of October?
Of October,
Yes, we'll have a draft by then.
right.
We'll have what's actually going to the selectmen.
The following, the 15th.
Oh my God, is that Friday the 13th? We'll make sure it's not Friday the 13th.
No, Friday the 13th is this month, I think. It's tomorrow.
Okay, so-
Tomorrow's Friday the 13th.
Okay, so, when that packet that we're asking the select board to vote on, I can get that draft out to you.
Okay. Do you have an idea of when that might be?
Started it.
Okay.
I have some, and we can walk through it if you want, which will give you a better handle on where we're headed.
Does the committee honestly have a preference? I don't want to be speaking for everyone. Do we want to go through sort of where we're at with them now individually, or do we want to?
These would just be 30,000 foot
Right.
level, basic subject matter, not in-depth explanations.
We might as well.
Okay.
Yeah, give us a first run through.
Okay.
Doesn't need to be in detail.
So at this point, we're looking at 11 articles subject to any late filers at the last minute. We have a potential for some late file bills. The finance director has sent out a notice to everyone. Have you got one? I got one. Okay. I have put on whether or not we need to make any internal transfers. With the staffing issues, we've been using some more consultants than others. And so we have at this point a potential placeholder for some adjustments to the budget. The state has sent you $31,882 more in Chapter 70, and the schools have asked for it, and the select board have directed me to place it on the warrant as a supplemental appropriation to them. We have the prudent investor rule, which I believe the director has brought in Bartholomew and spoken to you about that. The planning board has 2 zoning amendments. One relates to the fact that the state has passed a law that accessory dwelling units must be allowed by right. And there are certain amendments that need to be done to your zoning amendment to comport with that new state law, which took effect next month. Secondly, they've got some work on the Water Protection District. I'm not sure whether you put those in your warrant at length, or do you put a reference to them in?
Done both. Our previous, we've had 6-page articles before, and then we've had C appendix.
And this is at least the third time that this has come to town meeting.
Yep.
So, what is your druthers? I've seen towns do it both ways. If they're, short, I've seen the text. If they start to turn into 6, 8, 10 pages, I've seen, here's the basic thrust, here's the headings, go to this link, or get paper copies at the library and town hall.
We have not done the digital version. We've done the print version for everything, but we have done where it's all listed out in the article itself.
Okay.
And usually the person presenting, whether usually it's the planning board director, so they'll have a fun, fresh time to start this off. We'll go through a presentation to explain sort of what the changes are. Personally, I don't have a preference either way. I mean, it needs to be available for sure. People need to be able to read what the changes
I want to
are.
follow, there are some things I'm changing in my short time with you, but I also want to try to follow custom to the maximum extent possible.
I think in the past on those, we've gone with the preference of the planning board.
Yeah, we haven't had a say on it.
Right.
Personally, I'm done with we've always done it this way, so let's keep doing it this way, so I say have at it.
So I'll reach out to the planning board whether they want.
My personal preference would be that a very basic, short article is printed in the warrant, and the entire document be available at town meeting and digitally available and at the librry.
Yeah, we
previous to
usually
the
make it
meeting.
available in paper copies also, so.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, it should be available at the Ritter, it should be available at council on the Adult Activity Center, it should be available in the schools.
So we have a revolving fund we're proposing to add for the meals program. Do you want to speak to that?
It's essentially the meals program. It's just bringing the program in line to state standards, really. It's already been functioning to a certain degree, but it's more to bring everything in line. Like I said, it's just to make sure we dot our T's, cross our I's, to make sure we're compliant with, Mass General laws, to make sure that, so this meals program will go up at annual town meeting to appropriate, at the, what's the word?
The annual spending.
The annual spending.
Annual spending.
So it will be included within those.
So what chapter and paragraph is the particular,
I believe we're doing it under 53 and a half.
okay, same as,
So basically, right now, the folks make their payment, and that's set in a box.
Yep.
And I do not, we have absolutely no concerns over the safety and integrity of that, but it doesn't meet accounting standards. That should be on a turnover sheet, put into the revolving fund, and then expended from there.
Correct. So like he was saying, the funds are currently collected, put in a box, and then the funds are used to purchase items for the meals in order for the next meal to be created, at the senior center. But those funds are not recorded on the general ledger. They're taken and automatically used right away. We have no concerns. We've gone over the reports and everything. It's just, it needs to go through the turnover process, go through the treasurer's office, be recorded, and then the spending being done as it's supposed to be.
It will involve setting up a few vendor accounts so that we charge at Hannaford's or wherever they buy their supplies, get an invoice and pay them. The second is a revolving fund for the Parks Department, converting the 53D to a 53E and a half. You have, my understanding is that there's a problem with it that some folks have been aware of for a while now. At the end of every fiscal year, any amount in that account in excess of $10,000 by rights I believe it's 10, but I stand corrected.
I have
10,000.
30,000.
It's 10,000.
It is 10,000.
Yeah, it's, finance director advises me it's
Yep, that's
10. It's supposed to be swept to the general fund.
Yep.
That has built up to the order of
80.
80
That was in the 70s, yeah, somewhere.
80,000 plus or minus. So this would correct that. Now, 2 wrinkles. The revolving funds speak to accepting donations and bequests. That's not actually a perfect fit with statute because I'm not going to get into all the boring stuff. So we have to figure out how to deal with that. The second is that you're not supposed to establish a revolving fund for any fiscal year after July 1 of the fiscal year unless you can demonstrate to DLR that there was some new source of funding that becomes available. So I'm really not concerned about it, but I just want people to be aware of it in case we come back and say, oops, you're going to have to wait till the annual town meeting. But at least then, you'll have all the wording and know how you need to head in that direction.
Could I ask one more question? Back when I was actually on the commission, we had conversation with town council, and there was some conversation about a process that when we changed the revolving accounts, we also had to do something to transfer the money from the existing account to the new account, or you either lost it or it got tied up in that.
So it'll be a multi-part to see if the town will vote to amend the bylaw upon the effective date of the approval, because remember, all bylaws have to go to the Attorney General's office for approval. They review it, it comes back, your town clerk has to post it on the bulletin board, and until that date, it is not effective. So the second thing is that we'll transfer whatever monies are in the 53D account at that moment of the effective date. The treasurer will, the accountants will work to do that. And the third element, and I think there was only 3, I keep thinking there's a 4th one in there, and the third one is immediately upon doing that, the 53D account will be terminated. Is
As you said, it seems like there was a 4th step in there, but you and I might come up with it in the next day or two, whatever.
It may be, I just don't remember off the top of my head.
Yeah.
We have currently the potential for a warrant article related to assessing. You have accepted certain statutes with respect to veterans exemptions, 17D, I believe, and elderly exemptions, 41C. You have been increasing the limits of those, both in terms of the value and the asset limit, the income standards and the assets. The problem is, there's no record of you ever accepting the statutes that authorize you to do that. You cannot find it in the records of the town clerk. She's been very helpful and patient in trying to help us locate everything. They're not on file with the Department of Revenue. You must accept these before you can continue to raise these rates. And for fiscal 25, you are going to have to stay within the statutory limits. And then for fiscal 26, you can start to bring those limits up again based upon the CPI escalators that still have to go to town meeting every spring. Now, you do have some folks who may find they are not eligible in fiscal 25 for the credits they've been getting under the process you've been using. We will do our very best to determine how many of those are, and are there any things we can do to be helpful? You know, did we include Social Security income when perhaps we shouldn't have? We'll go through all those and be able to report more fully in a couple of weeks. But you've got to accept those statutes in order to take the action that you've been taking. Now, as I say, maybe you have it. DOR doesn't have it. Kathy doesn't seem to have it. And until it's on file with DOR, it doesn't exist. The last two more potentials, we've had a lot of conversation about recruitment. If you watch the school committee, they're going through some of the same pains we are. We've had people who had 20, 25 years of experience, and when we tell them they're going to have to start with their very specific job in municipalities, and we tell them they have to start back at the bottom at 2 weeks of vacation, it's like, nope, not doing it. So there are some things that we think could make the personnel bylaw, your salary administration plan, better for our recruitment and our retention. Well, we know exactly what we want to put in here just yet. We're having 2 listening sessions with our town employees, one for public safety. I think that's Tuesday, I can't remember the dates, Tuesday the 24th perhaps, and then one for all the others on the 25th. We want to hear what they have to say, and we will finalize our proposals as a result of that conversation. So I can't give you much more detail than that. And finally, the Parks Commission has requested an article to borrow a sum of money for the purposes of funding all the remaining costs of design and construction of the Marshall Park renovation project. I don't have a number yet, and I will leave to them to present on that article.
And they will not have a number by our next meeting. They will be getting their number in early October, and they have asked to present to us at our October 10th meeting to discuss that number. So that's going to be...
Well, that takes us back to the sum of money versus
correct.
A number.
Which, that's millions of dollars. That's a tough one to put in there without having a number.
But at this point, and we'll be advising in what we publish what each article requires, whether it's 9/10 majority, 2/3. So it's right there in the warrant for everyone to see ahead of time.
What is the vote on a bond?
I'm sorry, what?
What is the vote required at town meeting on a bond?
2/3.
2/3.
For a special town meeting?
Any town meeting.
Really? It's not increased for special?
The vote on your late filed bills is increased.
Right.
But no, debt limit, whether it's at the fall town meeting, the annual town meeting, or a special, it's 2/3. No matter when you take the vote.
Yeah, Evan, what was it that we pulled out of the capital and set it by itself because it required a 2/3? I don't remember, but there are certain things that are 2/3 no matter what, spring or...
Yeah, it was a very small amount that was going to drive it up to a 9/10, and we pulled it out and had it as a separate article so that it
Right.
could drop down to a 2/3.
Yes.
But I don't remember what it was. That was
It's hard to keep track of all
a year
those.
ago.
So those are the articles that we have at this point in time.
To go back really quickly to the exemptions, we have the personal property exemption amount, correct?
7D is the exemption for veterans on personal property, I believe.
DLS doesn't report us having that.
According to the sheet that I got this morning, they do have that.
From DLS?
Yes.
Okay, they have not reported it. So I've been doing a whole bunch of DLS digging, and I went through their whole adopted local options related
This
to
has
property.
proven a challenging trail.
Don't say that. I have so much stuff that I have to report from DLS.
I mean, if worse comes to worse, we'll re-adopt it.
Okay, because the only one I see listed on here is the personal property exemption amount for $2,500. That's the only one that they list. They do not have the veterans one, anything listed for the veterans.
I'll make sure to provide you with the worksheet. I was given.
Okay, if we have it, we need to make sure we can use it, or people can use it.
maybe we'll just do it pro forma.
Okay.
Nothing wrong with that.
Mr. Menard, you had your hand up?
Yeah, one question, we had some emails going off between Bill Bernard, Evan, Carter, yourself, and maybe Caesar, but at the Chapter 90 meeting that Bill gave, he presented on 5 miles of roads that the town says we have not yet accepted. He sent me the list of those roads, and I can assure you, most of them should be accepted, and I don't know where they were not. It seems to me that a quick fix to that is to simply put warrant articles on to accept those roads. And even if not all of them, some of them, as a result, increase our Chapter 90 funding. I think in a conversation I had with Bill, he said maybe you were studying that or had some recommendations or something else. I don't know if you could kind of comment on that.
Sure. I had a couple questions about that. The first were they in subdivisions? Were they in long-standing public roads? If they were in subdivisions, what had been the plan for accepting them? Were they to be, actually deeded to the town? Or were they simply to be laid out by the town? And if they were in subdivisions, what was the condition of the roads? And if the road wasn't built properly or has deteriorated substantially, what kind of liability are we taking on by accepting those roads? So I think that until you know the answers to some of those questions, it would be premature to simply add them to the list and try to accept them.
Yeah, so I'm just checking with you. As an example, in the list he sent, like Rob's Hill and Sunset Lane are on those. And then there were other ones that date back to I believe it was like the 1800s on roads. So I understand that on some of them, maybe not, but if we've been maintaining them for 30, 40, 150 years, it seems that we could quickly get to those answers and go ahead and clean up that area. And if there's a couple in questions, we could do it in 2 steps, but it didn't seem like, based on that list, that it would be a hard exercise to figure them out.
I'm not sure we can get it done for the fall town meeting, but I'll meeting with him and Chief Gamble on some other issues tomorrow morning, and I'll add that to the tick list of items to discuss.
Right, thank you.
Other questions regarding the current articles? Comments, thoughts?
I do have one question. Obviously, we don't have the number, but where does this annual cost of a substantial bond that the Parks is bringing forward, where's it going to sit in the budget? And how's it going to be raised?
So my understanding, and I did look at the plan that the former town manager sketched out as a possible financing plan, was that it would be fit into that $380 plus or minus $1,000 of debt that you have that's currently within your tax levy. So you've got about $160,000 dropping off next year. So if that comes in, what drops off the next year? I'd have to get that chart and lay it out. But as I understood it, the idea was to try to sort of do debt smoothing, keep that 384, or again, I can't remember the exact number, but keep that number flat going forward for the life of the bond.
And I'm assuming 10 years?
Is it?
I guess I'm asking what our choices are versus what they're going to bring forward.
Well, given that that's the plan, I'd have to know how much it is. And then you'd have to talk seriously about, do you want to do level principal every single year, which costs much more at the front end? Or do you want to do level payments, which, like your house mortgage, is exactly the same? This is much tougher to absorb at the front year, because if you got $5 million and, I'm just using a number here, sir.
Oh, I know what the numbers are
You got
already.
25 years, it's $200,000 a year, just on principal. But then, your interest starts dropping off considerably. Over here, you'll get a lower payment, but you're going to pay more in interest. So, is the appetite of the town for the lowest cost or for the lowest impact upon the budget and the tax rate? And you have to look at those and balance them out. You also have to look at when are you going to float the bond, because if you do bond anticipation notes, you got to remember that if it's a 25-year bondable project, but you float bond anticipation notes for 2 years, that comes off to 25 years. So now your final schedule is only 23 years.
So that accelerates.
You got to have a better sense of the numbers, and I don't.
Yeah. Just be prepared for a lot of discussion.
Sir, you are more than welcome to have all the discussion you want with the Parks Commission.
Yeah, well, I understand that. It won't be from me.
Well,
But and everybody's aware. I mean, the phone chains have been going for 2 weeks already on this.
I don't know enough about the project. It's their warrant article. They do have the financing plan of the former town manager. They've got some grants they put together to help offset costs. I think we just signed the contract with their designer to get final cost estimates. I will not know enough to speak to that project. I can address numbers, but nothing beyond that. Mr. Chairman, is there anything else we can do for the director and I do for you this evening?
We wanted to just make sure that that the prudent investment article was going to be all set and
Yes.
taken care of, and there's nothing else that we need to do for that one.
If I did mention that...
You did. I just wanted to check with the finance director as well, just to say, he's good, he's going to put it forward, or it's going to come from the executive side.
Yep.
Which works for me.
I mean, I think the thing that we need people to understand is this will affect one portion of your assets, not everything. I think we just need people to understand that.
Just a reminder, it only affects our trust funds. Our stabilization funds will not be affected by this. It's not part of the law, so.
Which is roughly about 1.7 million as far as Bartholomew calculated at that time.
I don't have the number.
I think I remember them saying it was about 1.7.
I've seen a lot of numbers since.
Really?
Apologize.
What have you been doing all day? All right.
I've got one question for the interim town manager. To date, has anybody approached you to discuss the possibility of using grant services funding?
No, sir.
Thank you. All I needed was a yes or no. Appreciate that.
Just a follow-up to that, do we have a process in place yet on how to utilize that fund?
Didn't hear it.
He was asking if there's, as a follow-up, is there a process in place for how to use those services? Have we developed one yet?
We're not going to develop it because it's a general government line item and it's controlled by the town manager.
I think that's who Chris was asking.
Yeah, my question is to the town manager.
Yeah.
Yep.
For my time with you, I will look for the lowest cost, no cost attempt to secure any future grants, whether it's a department head, it's Horizontal Engineering, an engineering firm that thinks they're going to get the contract or some such other service? And should I be here at the time of presenting you an FY26 budget? I frankly may be discussing with you some other needs of the community that I think could use all or a portion of those dollars. I think having some loose cash on the table, if you will, whether it's 5 or 10,000, is always good. I'm not sure what the discussion was about the 50, but at this point, there has not been outreach to the staff to say, no Bob Barker, come on down. It's...
And I think part of that is because nobody knew or knows how to approach that. There's nothing been put out there. The previous town manager and our clerk were supposed to get together and put some information together, and that never happened.
And who, sir?
Our clerk, who is no longer with us.
Well, I have to say, you've got a pretty good team that's been, I think, pretty successful in getting a number of these things. But frankly, all of our energies at this point are trying to get these capital projects on the street for bidding, get these ARPA projects out and funded, and deal with getting the budget closed and having your free cash so we can get through the town meeting and get a good start on fiscal 26. That's really where we've been trying to concentrate the energies that
I totally agree that the concentration right now needs to be getting the town to survive through this fiscal year and have a path forward that's successful beyond that.
I think
there's a lot of work right there, just in that statement.
I think the former town manager, from my observation, was a pretty good bean counter, pretty tight with the dollars from my observation. But these are very challenging times. You faced one override. What's next year going to look like?
Rainbows and puppies. That's what it's going to be.
Just a tiny bit of the backstory about where that 50,000 and that line item came from was that 3 of us attended the MMA conference, and we talked with a lot of people, and I also attended the Massachusetts Association of Finance Committee meeting in Sharon, and talked with a number of people, including the small towns out in Western Mass, that have grant writers on staff. They have more than one responsibility, but part of their responsibility is grant writing for various departments that come forward with, we need this kind of money, but we're not sure what grants to go after. And she calls around to the town when she's finished with what she had on her plate, calls around to see, well, what else should I go after? That's where it came from. But with the intent that 50,000 would hopefully bring in at least 2 or 3 times what we spend in grant money. And then the conversation was too that it may take a year or 2 before that takes hold. So then it would flow to free cash maybe in the first year, maybe 2. Just a little bit of the backstory.
The only other thing that I have is the former town manager had given us a copy of the DLS's financial policy manual draft, and we have done diddly squat with it because we've been doing so much other stuff. Our original intention or original request from her was just for us to kind of look through it and compare it to what we currently have and just see if we have any recommendations to offer to the select board and to the town manager. In your current capacity, is there anything that you would like us to or to not to do with that document?
I would like your comments on it.
Okay.
I've asked the select board for their comments by, I think it was 3 weeks out from their meeting. We've had discussions with the school committee. They have some concerns about some sections. I've reached out to them and suggested that I'm sure if I can understand what the issues are, we can find a way to word things in a manner that meets their concerns and statute. And so, for instance, the select board has to vote to accept donations and gifts. In some communities, they've delegated authority to the town manager to accept anything under $5,000 as long as they report to the selectmen at the next meeting. And, anything above, no, they still vote on that. Or they've made some provisions with respect to grants. The town manager can sign off as long as it's reported at the next meeting. And if, so I'm sure we can work a lot of that language out. I did send out an email. I'm not sure who prepared that, so I reached out to Zach Blake. He does a lot of the local services assistance, if you will, to see if they have a red line, as Mr. Passios mentioned the other night. I would not expect to hear from him for a few days, but if we can find an original red line, we'll by all means share it with you. I frankly have not gone through it on my own end because I want to see what everybody's comments were, and then I got to look at the document to try to fix that, and that'll be a great time for me to read it.
Okay.
Yep, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Perfect.
Well, I was just looking that up. Heather had given that to us. I was going to go right to Sean Cronin, and she said, don't.
Okay.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, just so you're aware, I did make a public comment. I think I introduced it as unauthorized at the select board meeting Tuesday evening that, I personally had at least looked through the financial part of it for the borrowing limits and so on, and made the comment that over the years we've made the comments that we really need to take a careful look at those numbers and see if they need to be increased, because that policy was written, I can't even tell you how many years ago that was written. It was way before my time even being close to on the Finance Committee. The Finance Committee wrote that entire policy and then handed it to the Select Board for their approval. So I don't know what we do with that, or we don't bother, we don't worry about changing the numbers this time around. I'm assuming we can change a policy just about any time through the proper channels.
No better time to do it when the document is up for original.
That's why I'm bringing it up, yeah.
And sometimes it's better off to use percentages because those live on.
Yeah.
Our fixed numbers, you're willing to borrow no more than, I'm just using a number here, $10 million when your total property, grand list property value is $500 million. It's still $10 million when your property's value go to $1 billion. So, maybe you look at some percentages there, because those can live on.
The three numbers that are in there are, correct me if I get this wrong, 4% for non-exempt borrowing, 7% for exempted borrowing, and 11% aggregate. Something in that. It's
Something to that effect.
pretty close to those numbers. It is in there as a percent.
I would suggest you use the term excluded from the levy, because within the there's a debt limit, and then there are projects outside the debt limit, which are not necessarily excluded from the levy limit. So when you say, exempt, it has a different meaning. If what you mean is it's going to be Prop 2.5, then I would suggest you'd say it's going to be Prop 2.5, because you're using a term that's defined elsewhere in the statutes, and probably the only people that might get confused are the finance director and myself, but I just think it's best to use the terms as everyone would best understand them.
Her name is Casey Bick, K-A-S-E-Y-B-I-K.
I was just worried.
Thank you. So I'll send a correction to Zach of Oops.
Don't mind this.
Ezekiel, is she the same one that sets the definition of full-time employee, that exchange we had a month or so ago?
I believe so.
I think she was the same person. I never reached out to her. It'd be interesting to know, we have, like it's actually in 53E and a half, isn't it? Yeah. There's a statement in there that talks about a full-time employee as defined by this particular person in the state, at the state level. So I was
So
trying to
again,
get
you
a
have-
determination as to what that really is.
20 hours.
But is that,
That's the definition.
53D, you cannot pay a full-time employee. Promise 53 and a half, where you can. So it's in that language between the two, the definition. I don't have the word.
okay.
And then you have to pay a proportionate share of their benefits.
Correct.
If you pay a full-time employee out of that fund, you have to pay a proportionate share of their benefits as well,
And you can do that legally at a 53E and a half.
as long as you put it in the permitted expenditures. Mr. Chairman, is it release time for us?
Here's the last
You want
chance.
a homer?
Mr. Bernard, do you have anything else before we? No, shaking his head. Thank you very much for sticking it out.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
If you
Thank
get-
you.
if you get
I'll get
bored,
a
bored.
schedule out to you in the next couple of days.
That'd be great. Thank you.
And I promise soon your meetings will be a half hour shorter.
All right. It's 9:15. I have two presentations. Or one presentation and one slide deck, or one template to go through. So I'm happy to put it to the board, or to the committee. So the first one is, I sent it around, it's a template for the budget presentations for the annual town meeting. So that's a little ways away, but we would need to have kind of a decision on it by October 1st to give to the interim town manager to give to the department heads. So there is some time constraint there. The other one is more relating to the budget task force and sort of where we have been working through, and it has to, where I'm kind of looking at things right now is the tax rate and whether or not a split tax rate is reasonably prudent to discuss for our report that's happening at Fall Town Meeting, just ahead of the select board choosing whether or not we're going to split the tax rate. And it's basically a study into a comparison with Maynard of all places, and how similar we are in a number of categories and what their tax rates are and how that would affect the residents if we had a split tax rate. So one's a presentation, one's a discussion. I'm happy to discuss either one of them. Does anyone have a preference for which one we go through first?
So you want to keep both of them on this evening?
Depends on how fast we get through them. I mean, the first one, personally, I would rather go through, I think it would be better to go through the template, since we need to give that to the town manager. And it's pretty, we would just need to kind of go through it quickly, I think, to see if there's anything people want to change on it. So unless anyone has an objection, I'll just plan to do that. Great. Let me share this. All right. So this is basically just my first stab, like I said, at trying to come up with something that we can offer to the department heads and to the town itself and the school department to say, this is how we would prefer to have the presentations given to the finance committee, in an attempt to sort of normalize across all departments. So we don't have, so we make sure that we're getting the information that we need to have the discussions on the budgets that are being proposed. And an attempt to kind of I don't know about minimize, but at least sort of streamline the meetings a little bit better. So I'm just going to kind of read through them. If anyone has a thought or wants a question or anything, please just stop. Just say stop me and we can talk about it. But it's to start off with, this is just a Finance Committee Town Department budget presentation template with the first slide starting off with the department's name, the presenter's name and title, and the date. Easy enough. Second slide is a departmental overview, giving them a chance to do a mission statement to summarize the department's purpose and role in the community. Give them a chance to tell the key services that are provided, briefly outline the essential services the department offers, staffing overview, number of employees, breakdown of full-time versus part-time staff, an organization chart if that would be useful for some of the smaller departments, just to kind of give us an idea and the town an idea of what the very high level overview of the department specifically is. After that, go right into a summary of the previous year's budget. So looking at the previous fiscal year's total budget, highlight the total budget and significant categories, for example, personnel, operations, so sort of a high-level look at the budget of last year's budget. Then do a cost spending to see how close we were to targets and projections. And then any just key accomplishments, if anything notable happened, or services that were maintained under the prior budget, if there was, sort of a, we did this with what we had option. For slides 4 and 5, because I think this is going to be tough to do on a single slide, again, this is sort of high-level stuff. The town manager or interim town manager is going to provide the department heads with a target budget. And he was discussing that this evening a little bit to say, this is sort of, here's where you get. This is what you're going to expect. This is your % increase over your last year's budget. That is what I'm calling the target budget for the upcoming year. And my ask would be on these slides to have that budget presented, something that fits within the town manager's target increase or decrease from a high level, not line item detail, just sort of categorical sections there. And then some sort of a 3, 5, 7, whatever year trend to show how we've actually been looking over the course of time on the target budgets and where we've kind of ended up.
I think that should be actuals and perhaps actuals and budgets for the last 3 to 5 years.
Instead of percentages?
Well, just where it says dollar increase, decrease, it's ambiguous as to whether the last 3 to 5 years would be budgets or actuals.
Okay.
I think we've recently seen more budget increases only. What are the trends in the budget? But I think we really got to be looking at what the actuals are as well.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Bernard. After that, a level service / needs-based budget to get kind of a better idea as to what's going on. So I know we had discussions last year of, is this a level service budget? Is this a needs-based budget? I kind of see them as one and the same, that if you need to maintain your services, that is a needs-based level service budget. So whether we want to call it level service, whether we want to call it needs-based, we certainly would need to define what we're looking for in that. But basically the same thing as the previous one, the target, but this time this is how far off we are of what we actually need, if we need more to run this department as efficiently or as necessary as possible to support the services of the town. Or if basically the differential of this is how much more we would need for this category because of inflation or it's getting late, increase in collective bargaining increase that was outside of what the scopes were, what was in the salary reserve line or something to that effect, to say like we can't meet the target budget because this percentage was higher, so this is what we would need to maintain this service.
I think needs-based budget is confusing to me. Level service means I provided this service last year, I'm going to provide the same service this year. I think there may be something with like a minimum service level. You know, the police may say, hey, my minimum service is this. Level services, I'm not adding any. And then maybe the other category is planned service. So if they're going through and they've documented a 5-year staffing plan, then they may have more services, but that's in line with the plan that they've laid out.
Okay.
Like, needs-based has always been confusing to me because it's ambiguous as to what the need is.
What I've kind of taken needs-based to mean is always sort of, if we had unlimited funds, what do you guys need? It's sort of that pie in the sky, this is what we would love to have. You know, we'd love to have whatever, you know, every police officer has 2 cruisers or something. Something to that effect. So needs-based, I agree. I feel it comes off as ambiguous, but at the same time, it is what you can also define it as, it's the needs of the department. In other words, it's that sort of, I would almost say it would be a minimum service. I think there's a lot of synonymousness to those.
Well, I kind of think it went both ways on that, maybe inadvertently, but to me, if their plan is they want to get to a certain level, and it almost sounded like you said that was needs-based. I think that should be the planned services. Level services, maybe I don't meet that this year. Like the police went in with a level service, even though their plan had been to add staffers. Mm-hmm. But again, minimum service would be like, in order to maintain safety, if, God forbid, we're in a situation where we're actually cutting police and fire and others, we need 3 police officers, right? Mm-hmm. That would be like a minimum service if we ever got close to that. Maybe the schools might have minimum service requirements in certain areas.
Other thoughts on?
But I think that plans is the next one.
What's that?
Well, again, I don't like needs, but minimum service.
Yeah, no, I just haven't taken it out yet.
And then plans. Maybe we just need to define those various categories a little bit better, but.
Yeah, I think this should come along with sort of the definitions for what our expectations are. So then this would need to get reordered to present the total proposed budget that maintains the current level of services. So it would be to maintain the minimum level of service.
I guess in general, we shouldn't be talking min level of service. Perhaps we typically talk compared to level service. Meaning we're providing the same services we did last year. The library is not open any additional hours.
Mm-hmm. Well, in that case then, well, see, I would see minimum service as if you weren't going to if we had to cut your budget, what could you get away with?
Right, I agree with that. So there may be statutes surrounding certain school services. The minimum we can go to on this is this. After that, we're in violation.
Do we need to see that as a presentation though, or do we just need to see?
I guess my point being on these slides is it should be targeted towards something. This year, I am still trying to maintain my plan for increased services, or I am going in with a level service, which may also be. But you want to anchor it towards like something.
So what are you thinking for here then? Specifically, like what are you thinking for this section of a budget?
Why can't we just do department head proposed budget? it's their responsibility to come up with what they need. So just tell them, put your budget together as you see you need it. So you've got the target budget, and you've got the budget that the department head feels he needs, and then background to support it.
But need is
We
subjective.
get
right?
too specific in this, and we're going to have 5 different iterations of budgets.
Right, I'm trying to
for every
minimize,
department.
exactly, I'm trying to minimize it, so, I mean, they're gonna have 2 budgets anyways. They'll have the one that meets whatever the town manager puts forward, and they'll have the one that they assume that they would put forward if they were able to, or respond back to the town manager to say this
I
is.
think asking for the minimum you can live with is a waste of energy.
Yeah,
No, my point being is that need is subjective.
right,
We tend to talk on level service. However, there may be a case where they need to come to us and say, these cuts get me to a minimum service. I cannot go any lower. And I think that that's what should be described through this process.
I'm not going to be here for this anyway, so. I still
Can
think
we
you
make
should
note
be-
of that and just go through the rest of this?
okay. Chris, I am happy to have you do whatever you would like to that section and submit it. If you have something like if you have some idea that you can write down, I think it'd be easier just to kind of work through it. I agree that I think you're right. I think we need to it needs to be changed from what it is, and we need to but it needs to be, I think, specific enough that it removes the ambiguity and it removes the potential for having multiple different types of budgets presented.
I'll try to take a stab at it. I think I know how I might do it.
Okay. All right. So now we're getting into ones that I threw out there just to have them. I don't know if we necessarily need them, but this is sort of a more in-depth look at the budgets themselves. This is kind of the 15,000-foot view, so getting into the personnel costs. Just again on one slide, your salaries and wages overall, increases due to contractual obligations, steps, collective bargaining, whatever it may be. The healthcare, pensions, OPEB stuff, and then staffing changes. This is where you would kind of highlight 5-year staffing plans, or we're changing this department around and we feel like we need to split this position into 3 positions, or whatever it may be. Changes to that effect. Operating expenses is pretty self-explanatory, just the day-to-day operations. But I think we do want to have this portion here, identifying any factors causing increases or stability in operational expenses. So that's sort of your inflationary or unforeseen expenses that pop up. An elevator breaks and you didn't expect that to fix it, something to that effect. I threw capital in here just to give, because they are going to be requesting capital projects, probably, most of the departments, or some of the departments will, so this at least gives an opportunity, and they usually have them in their presentations anyways. But this gives an opportunity to just throw it into a slide and say, these are the projects that we're looking for. Obviously, again, we don't need the granular view of it. That's what the capital planning committee is for. But I would like us to at least have an idea as to what's going to be brought forward, because it does affect the budget substantially.
I think the one-pagers that are pulled together for all the ones that are recommended to go forward should just be reused in this.
Should just be what?
Reused in this area. So if DPW has 3 capital projects that made it through the capital planning, it's just the 3 slides that equate to each of those 3 capital items.
Yes, okay, I agree. To the extent that that CPC has actually approved them, or just they're going to put them, like they're above the line?
And I guess if they're above the line, or maybe even perhaps near the line.
Okay. Okay.
But again, I think they already have a one-pager for these, hopefully. So just put in the one-pagers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't want to see the stuff that, their 15th request that we're not going to see for a number of years. This is just, these are the things that are the main ones. And then, again, kind of the projecting out for some of the larger expenses. We're going to need a fire truck in FY, whatever it may be. We're going to need a new school in FY, whatever it's going to be, something to that effect. This one I wasn't so sure about, justification for cost increases. I feel like this is sort of captured in the slide of the key cost drivers portion. But it does at least take into account the unfunded mandates portion. So this one I wasn't entirely sure of keeping in here. Happy to take it out if we need to.
I think the if applicable makes a lot of sense.
Okay, if they have something that's in there, if, pencils go through the roof for cost, throw it in there.
Yeah.
Okay. Next one is efficiencies. So this one is an attempt to try to, I know that the department heads are already doing this, but this is giving them an attempt or a chance to kind of show us and the town, this is what we're doing to try to maintain our budget, or keep our budget as thin as possible. But here's what we're kind of up against. More of, basically just to that effect, just to give them an opportunity to say that we're trying to cut costs, here's what we're doing to try and cut costs, and here's what we're actually up against, and here's what's changing. So this one, I think, kind of gets to what you were sort of saying. This is sort of the minimum service. This is what would happen if you were if you were to reduce services below a certain threshold, if you hit statutory issues or operational issues, basically.
This could also be an if applicable.
Yeah. And we're just going to drop out needs-based because, and we'll get back to level service afterwards. Revenue sources. So if this is just, obviously where their funds are coming from through appropriations, but then also grants that are coming in or anticipated grants. I'm thinking like Title I grants or sale of cemetery lots or whatever the extra funds may be, or parks user fees or program fees or whatnot, just other things to help fund their portions. Then also it gives an opportunity for grants to be brought forward if there's grants that they're going after.
So like where would we introduce like Chapter 90 funding into the mix here?
So the Chapter 90 funding is a reimbursement.
Understand, but we can utilize it to augment the operational costs of
the pavement management plan and stuff like that. I'd have to go back through Bill's presentation, but he did take us through where he was spending down Chapter 90 pretty aggressively. He had a forecast in there.
Yeah.
That I'll go back through it as well.
And I was only using that by way of an example. There might be other ones.
Highlight that one and I can come back to it. Okay. Departmental goals. So I know this is usually put towards the front, but I really want to drive the importance of getting to the budgets since that's our job, that's our task, but I do want to still give them an opportunity the departments an opportunity to kind of give the general public this is what we're doing, this is why we're here. So if they do have service goals, and this could be your sort of 5-year staffing plans or coming years, I suppose. You could have staffing plans here, you could have equipment replacement plans here, whatever it may be.
I almost think this should go up front though, even up, because this may be where you outline, hey, this budget is based upon our 5-year plan to do X, or this budget is aligned with our, just a level service budget. So it gives us that context right up front.
Sort of right after that guy, I assume.
Yeah, I mean, you guys can push back on it too. That's my opinion.
That at least puts it sort of, it leads you right into your budgets.
Yeah.
These are
that's
our
right.
these are our goals. This is what we're trying to get to. Now here's where we are, and before that is here's where we were. Kind of sandwich it. All right, I will change that number. Challenges for the upcoming year: external or internal pressures and factors. Yeah, this is this might be redundant.
It could be year and years too, right?
I'm sorry?
It could be upcoming years.
Yeah. Yeah, looking forward, we're expecting to have issues with these buildings, or...
In 2 years, there's a new law coming online that will require us to do this, so
Yep.
keep that in mind.
Okay. And then finishing up with the conclusion summary, just kind of a one final plug, sort of a slide. And then just questions. And then I threw in some additional notes where we can put in kind of the definitions of what we're calling level service or minimal service or needs-based service or whatever we want to call them. But I did put a request in for the line item spreadsheets or whatever munis documents or whatever we're going to get and we'll have to change these target, budget, and whatever we're going to call the other one, budgets, to the Finance Committee a minimum of 7 days in advance of the scheduled presentation, so that we have a chance to kind of go through the lines, look at things more granularly, but then we have the presentation with a higher level look at it. And that way, I don't want to repeat last year where we're doing it in the meeting, looking every line by line. I think that was, this year was an exception. And I would ideally like to get back to, I trust the department heads to do their job and the departments to do that. And then we're just kind of funneling it towards the town at that point.
And that detailed budget documents, I think also should have the 5 prior years or something like that.
When you get this close to finalized, one of the things I was thinking, there was at least one paragraph, if not a couple more, that you said if they feel a need for appropriate comment. And I don't remember which one it was, but maybe we could put an asterisk next to those paragraphs so that they don't feel they absolutely have to have that slide, and put a note at the end, optional if you feel appropriate, or I don't know how you word it, but it would allow them to drop off possibly 2 or 3 slides if they didn't really feel it was necessary or appropriate for their department.
Right. I mean, the ones that come kind of to mind here would be the Council on Aging, for example, their request for the additional meal services person. And if Sue was not able to pull as much grant funding as she was able to, how those two would affect, I could see her using these 2 slides to say, here's what happens if we don't have this meal service person, and here's what happens if we don't get these grants. Just a heads up, you're going to be the town is going to have to be on the hook for $20,000. So yeah, that was sort of my initial stab at it. I will send around kind of an updated version unless anybody wants to change anything else for now. Otherwise, I just ask that you take a peek, take a look over it, make changes as you see fit, but just send them back to me so that we're not violating open meeting law.
Yeah, I think it was really good, Evan. I think we may have to have some flexibility the first year for this, especially given the situation we're in. And maybe even be able to reach out for help if they're struggling with what we need on things.
Yeah, I agree. I think if anything, this is probably the better year to do it too, since we're in between town managers. So we can kind of say, here's our policy, here's what we request. Let's implement it that way. Okay. So I will send that out. Okay, thank you for going through that one. So the real kind of big takeaways, that's not a presentation you guys need to see, that's my work presentation. There we go. I don't want to go through this in any sort of high-level detail, or in any sort of granular detail. And I actually haven't even made it to conclusions on this presentation yet. I have them, but it was more just a kind of walking through a method of looking at budgetary numbers that are largely different. You know, a 2.5% increase on a $30 million budget is very different than a 10% increase on a $100,000 budget. And so comparing the percentages is helpful when it is over the long term to see how the percentages have changed, I think, on a net up and down. I think looking at the raw numbers is okay to look at, for the same reason. But if you're going to compare department to department or town to town or whatnot, you're looking at sort of skewed data that's going to change more as the years spread apart, because a Prop 2.5 increase in one town that levies $50 million is very different from a Prop 2.5 town that levies at $30 million, and especially the next year and the next year, that gap just keeps on growing. So I started looking at weight averaging everything.
Are you presenting something?
What's that?
Are you presenting something?
No, I guess I can. I can throw it up real quick.
No, that's fine. I didn't know if you were.
No, why not? What else are we doing, right? There we go. So specifically, I was looking at Lunenburg and Maynard, and for a whole bunch of reasons. I am going to fly through this. So there's a lot of similarities that I found. Population by the censuses in 2021, we were very close, 11,800 for us, 10,500 for them. Our DOR reported 2020 income per capita is similar, 44,000 versus 46,900. The FY24 assessed valuations, total valuations, are within $150 million out of $2.2 billion. So very similar in terms of total assessed valuations. That's residential and CIP. And if you break that down, the residential is relatively close, 91.7% versus 90.3%. But our CIPs are actually very, very similar, both in percentages and in values, the valuations themselves. So from a monetary standpoint and an asset standpoint, we are quite similar. The difference, though, is in the tax levy and capacity. I noticed the first one was a tax levy and capacity. So going through I started doing just from 2018 to 2024. Eventually I get to like 2010 or 2003. So I'm going very far back for trends. But just looking at sort of what the town is, what the levy limit is of the town versus the excess levy capacity. And for the most part, with the exception of FY24, we are always levying basically right to our capacity. Interestingly, Maynard does not levy right to their capacity, but they're still within 1/6%, so they're very close to their capacity. So not much of a difference there. And then we get into my weighted budget, so because it's 10 o'clock at night, why not do some algebra? To weight these, I'm just taking whatever the budgetary number is divided by the sum of the budgetary number. So basically over, how it is affected by the entire budget. So it brings everything down to a percentage. And that allows you to see things like a trend line where you can compare side by side Maynard versus Lunenburg. Because as I was saying, Maynard's levy limit last year was 38.8 million. Our levy limit was 31.8 million. Those are obviously different, but on a year-to-year basis, they're not going to climb the same. So if you do a weighted average comparison, you actually get to see what they are next to each other, and you're not looking at these massively skewed plots. From a revenue side, so these are just percentages of the total taxes. So this is how we're making our money. I took out for us FY23 because that was the abatement year, and it was vastly different. It was, very different year. It's an anomalous year. Yeah, we won't go over that, but basically, the trends in 7-year trends of revenue, how they've changed, it really hasn't changed all that much between the two towns in terms of, other than taxes and state revenue, where Maynard has lost a lot of money in state revenue over the last 7 years. But we have increased our taxes. They've increased their taxes actually more than we have. Local receipts in terms of how much we estimate versus what we actually bring in. So this is the conservativeness of our local receipt calculation, where we don't necessarily, where our actual value is how far it is different from what we estimate. And for the last few years, we have been exceptionally conservative with our local receipts, where we've estimated around 3 million and we've pulled in over 4 million. So is there room for maybe going a little bit less conservative and freeing up a couple $100,000 to end the budget? That's possible.
In the last 2 years, that's been our first place to look for a buffer to add to something else.
Yep, exactly. So
we were even more conservative in the initial number. And
correct. So looking at it from a percentage standpoint, the underestimation percentage, we range anywhere from about 7.5% under up to about 35% under. And that value ranges from about $300,000 to about $1 million. So and that's the minimum to the maximum. So there has never been a time since 2017 where we have actually been incorrect.
And by doing that year after year and having that result, you're starving something else.
Correct. So I think we've been. It's good to be conservative in that regard. I don't want to calculate it to the penny, but I think we can certainly say we're really not as tight as we need to be. And if you look at kind of 5 years, what's that?
I think it's just how we arrive at free cash.
One more. What was that about free cash?
Yeah.
I think in the end, all we do is turn this into free cash to fund capital projects.
Yeah, that's true. But we could potentially, if we do narrow that down, we could close up the free cash or the available. We could draw the line lower for capital projects potentially.
It's either that or we could commit a percentage of appropriated funds to capital.
Right.
Former town manager, 3-4 years ago, in her suggestions at the end of the budget season, she made some comments about possibly looking at shifting the funding of capital into the budget rather than relying totally on, or not totally, but relying so heavily on free cash. Mm-hmm. You do that, then you're not under budgeting or you're not starving other accounts. There's a number of towns that do that. I've mentioned it before. There's one that I'm aware of. They take 10% of their free cash and roll it back into the budget because it was appropriate. It was raised and appropriate that year, and they had this huge overage. So they take 10% of any free cash on a yearly basis and roll it back into the budget. But this was the finance committee that creates the budget also. So.
Right. If you look at averages from 2017 to 2021, we were on average 15% underestimated for an average of about $500,000. If you include up to 2023, we were 20% under on average for $600,000 a year on average. I think we can commit more, probably. So that's one of the bigger ones that I've found so far. I'm not even going to get into this one yet, the weighted average revenue. It's basically what I found is that there's not a huge difference in revenue choices other than the taxes. The taxes are basically the only difference between the two towns, and who bears the burden. On expenditures, this is basically just how they've trended over the last 7 years. On general government, Maynard somehow has spent less, where we've spent more. And then I went into the weight averaging. So because, like I said, the actual values here and the percentages are skewed because they're vastly different numbers in terms of how much they're spending on it. So a 6% difference is not necessarily that different from a 5.5% difference if the actual numbers are different. So on a weight averaged, they really aren't all that different. They actually overlay completely. So we really haven't been spending any different on our general government compared to Maynard. And we actually have been relatively flat since 2002 as the weight version of the budget. Police department, I don't know what the heck Maynard is doing. They're all over the place. But if you average them out, we've actually trended pretty similar to them. We're both growing at a similar, at sort of a commensurate rate. And over the long term, same idea. We're basically in the same general location for how we're funding our police department. Fire department is a weird one. We've started skewing up substantially from 2017. When you're looking at a weight average difference, any change, any deviation from the average is a substantial difference.
Almost, I put money on it that it's the transition into 24/7 paramedic.
I think.
With the increases in overtime and personnel and expenses.
Yep. So that is something that I would like the budget task force to kind of look into a little bit more as to why are we, here we're it's just a nice flat linear, or a nice linear line. We've got a decent slope to it. Here we're noisy, but we're linear. Here we're clearly parabolic. We are increasing substantially. What is next year going to look like? And do we need to relook at how we're funding the fire department and how much we're putting forward? I'm not saying we need to cut the fire department. I'm just saying you need to look at it and say, why is it different? What's going on here?
And ask the question as to how we can flatten that line out.
Yep. Is there a way that we can?
Right.
Other public safety, this one is an umbrella, so it's obviously not going to be, it's going to be noisy, more noisy for Maynard, but again, similar, we've been relatively flat since 2002. Education. This one caught me off guard. I was expecting us to be very different, but on a weight average, and what this tells me is, I think that basically your increases are sort of kept at a minimum and to what you can do on a yearly basis, and that unless you're investing a substantial amount of funds, that this number is not going to change because this number is basically trending with inflation. I think that's just, it's the largest part of the budget. It's how it's going to change over time is going to be sort of similar from town to town. But it was interesting to me to see that for Maynard, we spend $15,000 per pupil. I believe Maynard spends $18,000 per pupil. So they spend more. But I believe it's coming from, like I said, the split tax rate is different, so it's not as bared as heavily by the residents. Public Works, Maynard is decreasing over time, and Lunenburg is increasing over time. I would argue that is our roads. That's my best guess for that one. But again, it's really not that big of a change overall. Human Services, this is likely health insurance, I believe, and OPEB is my guess, but I haven't dug through what Human Services works out to. And we are increasing faster. Not sure why. Culture and Recreation, similar to the fire department, but not as aggressive. So another one that I think is worth kind of looking into to say, why are we kind of deviating from the slope, the normal slope, and starting to kind of move into a parabolic increase? Fixed costs, are fixed, so that's good. Intergovernmental assessments, increasing a lot faster than I would expect them to, but I'm assuming that this is likely more sort of your unfunded stuff, unfunded mandates and whatnot, but again, I'm not entirely certain what intergovernmental assessments falls into those categories. Debt service, that should be pretty level. We haven't taken on too much extra debt. You can kind of see the years that we do. You get a little blip up. So back in 2003, 2004, I think that was the primary school-ish. And then 2016, 2017, the high school, maybe, something like that. Maynard kind of follows similarly. Interestingly, they kind of build something big on the same general timeline. But they are paying off their debt services faster than we are over the time. So this is not looking at the specific numbers again. This is just looking at the how they kind of compare. If you look at everything, total expenditures, all added together, all evenly weighted, we are basically the same, which I would expect because our revenues are very similar, our expenditures are very similar. 7-year trends, so we have actually seen a decrease of our, this is now the actual, this is moving away from the weight, this is the differential of the weight averages from the 7 years. We are slowing down, so basically our slope has decreased for education by about 0.5%, and our debt service has decreased by about 0.5%, so we're paying things off. We've increased, like I said, for fire, for police, for general government, for fixed costs. The other ones are relatively flat. Maynard seems to be going kind of the other way. They're not as high for these ones, and they're increasing their education, and their intergovernmental assessments are through the roof for whatever reason. So not too much of a surprise there. That's as far as I've made it for so far. The big thing that I have from this is that Maynard does a split tax rate. And we've always been told that unless you hit 20% or 15% CIP, you're going to drive businesses out of town. Maynard is not driving businesses out of town. They've had a split tax rate. I know Renee is going to correct me at some point, but I believe since at least 2013, so it's been a number of years. And if you apply the same, I actually calculated out what, in order to maintain the same levy, but splitting out the rate to basically fit within that levy limit. Obviously, you can choose different percentages of how much you want the CIP to bear, whether it's 25%, 50%, 175%, whatever it is. But it's just a simple, quick math. It comes out to, I think, a differential of like $1.4 million shifted from residents over to CIP, which frees up an awful lot of funding for residents. And then that kind of brings the sort of next logical step of, well, if that's a consideration, do we then say, you know, we give the break of $1 million per year, basically to the residents, and then you do a debt exclusion on top of that in that same time period. If it's a debt exclusion, you're just going to pull it from, it's going to be in addition to the levy anyways, so it's essentially, instead of your tax bill dropping by this much, it drops by that much, in a sense. There's other options that you could do at the same time with, so that would give you the ability to do buildings, and you could do, it frees up a lot of cash. The tricky part is it does shift that over to the CIP, which...
I was going to say, the CIP, you just gave that graphic with your hand, but the CIP goes...
Well, it's a difference. So right now, the residents are footing 91% of our levy.
Okay.
This shifts it down to 87% of our levy. So still the vast majority, but it allows Walmart or whomever owns the property that Walmart sits on and Hannaford sits on to have, you know, more that they would put forward. There's other things you can do as well with small businesses for exemptions and whatnot, under 10 employees for exemptions, you obviously can give them some breaks, so you're not driving out small business, but it at least allows the tax. I think the conversation should at least be had to allow the taxes to come down, to allow affordable housing a little bit better, so.
I still, in the back of my mind, think that if you had local income tax to also leverage against what you've just been talking about, you'd have some real good flexibility, take some pressure off the people that need the pressure taken off of them, and not hurt your ability to raise revenues.
Income is not wealth. There's a lot of wealthy people who have zero income.
True.
And, I know we like to say, Walmart, Hannaford, whatever, but we are struggling with restaurants, small businesses, and everything else, so we're not Maynard, right? Maynard is in a different area of the town, surrounded by other towns where it's more vibrant.
It is and it isn't. I mean, the CIP is almost identical. So it's not, the biggest difference between them is the size. We have 24 miles, 25 square miles, Maynard has under 3. So it's massively compacted down. And I also looked into commute times between them, how people are getting to work. We're within, I think we're 35 minutes on an average commute. Maynard is 30 minutes on an average commute. Lunenburg actually has more people taking public transportation than Maynard does, and they're right next to a whole bunch of public transportation. I think that, yes, they are closer to other opportunities, but if they've had this, I think, again, it kind of goes along the lines of, well, we've never done it before, so therefore we shouldn't do it now. And I think while that may be the outcome, I think the discussion still should be had. I don't know how much more you can tax our residents. And if we're going to be doing debt exclusions, if we're running out of space capacity for debt exclusions, or just debt capacity spending in general. Go ahead.
What does the LBA think about this?
Oh, I'm sure they're not going to like it too much. I can think of a number of families in town that probably would not like this too much. But that doesn't mean that the conversation should not be had. So that was, I just kind of wanted to bring it to the Finance Committee first before I bring it to the Budget Task Force, I think, next week, so I need to finish those slides up pretty quickly.
I meant what you said on what the split tax rate would be. Did you say that?
No, because so this is where the Board of Assessors would have to get involved, because you choose how much, you set the threshold for how much your CIP is going to bear relative to the residents. And there's different, I think you choose like 125, 150, 175, I think you can go up to 200%, something to that effect. I didn't actually calculate those. What I ended up calculating, oh God, I have so many spreadsheets open right now. Oh, there it is. So with what I calculated, that one. Let's see.
You don't have it, it's not a big deal. It's just
Oh, I have it somewhere. It's in here. There we go. No, this one. Yes. All right. Oh, it'll help if I share this. So right now, like I said, Lunenburg is funding 91%, no, make this bigger, 91.74% of the levy in town. Maynard is around 87%. However, if you look at the valuation, the percentages of the valuation, that's where you get similar numbers. So this is where, obviously, if we're a single tax rate, your percentage of the valuation is going to equal your percentage of the levy. So Maynard's actual percentage of valuation, that's where I was getting the 9%, the 90% for residential, and then CIP being the remaining 9.68, where ours is 8.26%. So not vastly different. If you do drop it down to where our residents are in the same, whatever Maynard chose for their percentage of weight to be borne by CIP, I just went to that similar percentage. So the percentage on the residents was similar. In that sense, set the tax rate with that. Obviously, that is not how you set a tax rate, but the math still works. And so with that, it ends up being a decrease of, 5.1%, and you split the tax rate. This one works where it's, $22.10 per thousand for CIP and $13.38 for residential. Obviously, that can be shifted around, but that's where you get your 1.4 million. So. That's where I put that one. So, I don't know. It's a discussion that I think needs to be had, and then, because the select board chooses whether or not they're going to do a split tax rate right after special town meeting, like the week after, I think. So I think it's a conversation that needs to be had by the public at select board meetings coming up.
Yeah, I think the select board always goes with, well, they always tell us this, and, we've always done it that way. All the things that you've been saying this evening, that we need to look at these things from a different lens.
That got us that got us into a $1.6 billion abatement problem. So it's just, yeah. And I'm not saying we need more oversight, I just think we need to have more conversation. And look at things and consider things that we haven't done, just not because we haven't done it, but just because we should. And then interestingly, if I make Maynard a single tax rate town, their residents would have to eat up a $1.1 million increase in their taxes. So similar thing, similar numbers.
I'm kind of confused by that sheet because it had the tax rate.
Maynard. Open it back up again. I am very happy to send it to you if you would like, Chris. So this is polled, anything that has this B levy percentage, any of these categories up here at the top, those were pulled directly from DLS. So this is a report that I pulled right off of DLS for, just make sure I get the, yeah. For, I believe it was FY24, it must be FY24, yeah, because we've closed that FY24 by now. So these are FY24 values, so I just pulled them directly from the DLS report and then brought them into here so you could see them this way. And then I just added in these columns to shift it over from percentage of the levy versus percentage of the valuation.
Well, I'm just going on column G, just 18.
What's that?
Column G for Maynard, I think.
Yeah.
There's 1845 across all four.
Yep. Correct. I put that in there. Because Maynard is actually, oh, this one doesn't have it. No, this was when I was still messing around with the numbers to make it work.
Okay.
Everything in here is all formula driven at this point. So once I got to here, once I started adding in my own columns, that was where I went to formula driven. So I put in the 1845. That's not what their tax rate is. This was me just trying to calculate what it would, I wanted to make sure that what I did to one, I did to the other one to see how it would affect the other town effectively. But if you do it, it's calculable, or you can just go back and, I can go back and look to see exactly what it is. But when you have these numbers here, you can just get their levy and divide it by the percentages, and you can find exactly what it is based on their valuation number. They do come back. Oh, yeah, and this was the chart. The only thing that was left was the tax burden by residentials at $14.10 per thousand, which is where we are now, versus at $13.38 and $22.10. So, yeah, I can send this to you, Chris. I'll clean it up. I have so much TLS stuff in here. But I can clean it up and at least send you over this one if you want to look through it.
It's not important. I was just wondering on that one.
Why it's actually 1845? Yeah, it's not. Maynard is not 1845.
Yeah, their tax rate is over 20 residential and close to 27
For commercial?
for commercial in 2021.
Yeah.
They have really high taxes there.
Yeah. Which is interesting because their CIP versus residential, that ratio is very similar. They have similar incomes, they have similar populations. Even their student sizes is almost, it's within 100 kids for schools. There's a lot of overlapping numbers there. So, and that is, like I said, the reason their taxes are, you just get wider and wider when you put more weight on the CIP carrying the difference. And that's sort of, that's done by the assessors. They put those reports together. That's easily done by them. They can just, it's literally just a, which one do you want to choose? Here's the different ones, and here's what it would, here are the results for what you would get out of that. Miss M. Key?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. My AirPods actually died during this meeting. I looked in DLS quickly just to check. I can go back to 2003, and it looks like Maynard had a split tax rate going back that far.
To 2003?
That's as far back as I can see in DLS.
Yeah, for all of the stuff that I was presenting, that was all back to 2003 for that same reason. Yeah. So
it was, okay. And they are also a CPA community.
Oh, I wasn't even going to get into the CPA conversation yet.
But that's an addition, that's like just more, more tax for them.
Yeah.
That's
That gets into, so CPA community is Community Preservation Act. And that was another thing that it's taxed by the residents and by, it's levied money. But it goes to the preservation of what you consider to be Lunenburg. So there is that sort of remaining Lunenburg argument, but you can pull you get some matching funds from the state to sort of subsidize that as well. And there's more grant funding out there for it. That's another one to discuss, but not tonight.
Maybe a new attitude towards that, but it's failed twice on town meeting floor and not got past the Board of Selectmen the third time.
Just because it's failed doesn't mean it can't be done.
Oh, I'm not saying it can't be done, I'm just giving historical facts.
If you tie it in with a split tax rate, tax cut, you might be able to get it. If your bill still goes down and you get to keep Lunenburg looking like Lunenburg, a nice rural community to an extent.
1.5% local income tax.
Non-realized capital gains tax. There you go. All right.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
You know, just looking at this, I'm really surprised that the CIP is so similar between Lunenburg and Maynard, especially there's just a massive development that's gone in on Route 27 in Maynard that just continues. It's still growing.
What year is this? What year is this data from?
I pulled these data so long ago, Chris, I genuinely do not know. I would have to go and look to see exactly when, oh, here we go. 2024, FY24.
Yeah, that development was already, trying to think back. I think some of the stores in there had already opened by then.
I mean, so the Maynard has had a split tax rate for 20 plus years.
Yep.
They have a large split in their rate. The CIP takes a lot of the burden on that one. And they just built a large complex where they're bringing in more business. So I think, and they have a CIP of under 10%. Maybe they're an anomaly, but I think, I don't know.
I just think it's that inside of 495 belt versus District 11. Hunger Games reference.
I started doing, how far out? I don't even know if it's in this one. Oh yeah, we can get into the pivot charts and stuff too if you really want to. I started looking at some of that. Not that one, not that one. I don't know. I don't want to look into it tonight, but I have other stuff that I was looking for that exact sort of purpose, Chris, to get into that a little bit more. Where I was comparing other towns that were similar to us, but outside of the belt based on any number of factors. Mostly, my main driver was the residential valuation was over 90% or over 88% or something like that, and then filtering it again to see if their residents are footing more than 88% of the levy. And there were 20-ish communities in and around the area. Some of them were in Western Mass, some were down in Cape and the Islands, some were inside the 495 belt. It's kind of like a little smattering, like a little scatter plot. But that doesn't mean they're all split tax rates. That doesn't mean that what the CIPs, it was more just a sort of a higher level looking at it.
I mean, the Cape has other issues, right? They got,
What's that?
the Cape has seasonal ownership rates.
Yeah, I recognize very clearly that you can't compare everything for that exact reason. It may not even be with this one. It might be in another one of my spreadsheets. Oh, it is. It's in the CC levy. This one, yeah. I had started going through asset assessed by valuation in classes and whatnot. So, yeah, I had started kind of sifting through all the DLS towns. It's just, yeah, could spend days in there. So yes, I certainly want to, if there's anything that anybody wants me to bring to the budget task force based on this, I'm not saying, I'm going to present that it is absolutely not the opinion of the finance committee that we go to a split tax rate, just that I have presented this to the finance committee. But it's sort of next up in our discussion for the budget task force for what to do for revenue generation or expenditure decreasing or whatnot. And while this doesn't generate revenue, it just shifts the burden somewhat. Anyone else want to talk about this, or is it dead?
I think we're done for the night. At least I am.
I'm good with skipping everything else. The only thing I have a question on, Chris, is where are we with the town manager search?
We put that, the group that we interviewed, I forget their name, I'm tired, under contract. We met with them last night. They're gonna do interviews with a bunch of people in town to get an idea of the character of the town and, a good assessment for potential candidates. And we have a meeting on the first Monday in October to vote on kind of their their requisition to go out to the advertisements.
The RFP? Not the RFP.
Yeah. No, the RFP's behind us.
Right.
We're already on contract for the company. And then we're looking, there'll be a whole bunch of executive sessions to narrow down certain candidates. The candidates' names are never known, even in the minutes of the executive session. And then we'll interview probably 7-ish, hopefully, probably around Thanksgiving time frame, and pass on at least 2. You cannot pass on 1 by law. At least 2, maybe 2 to 4 to the select board for their final interviews shortly thereafter, with a plan to have it negotiated by the end of the year for being hired. So I think I kind of have that timeline.
What happens if you have a failed search and you only have one option?
Yeah, I think you got to go back in and figure out what to do.
Okay. Statutorily, you cannot?
Yeah. Okay. Yep. There's like case law on it, I guess. We discussed it last night.
Okay.
He expects we'll get at least 15 candidates.
Really?
That's kind of the norm for this area. There's also, they're going to make a recommendation for salary as well. So that should be coming out in the next couple of weeks.
Okay. Is there a plan for the search committee to do anything at special town meeting for updates or anything?
No, I don't think so, no.
Okay. All right, any other questions for Chris? Excellent. We have one set of minutes, they've been revised. You want to vote on them now just to get it done?
Now I want to hold those to the next meeting. I've got to make some revisions.
There's more to make, okay. They're in the drive, that's the updated version, so just feel free. Does anybody have any absolutely necessary committee reports for the evening?
No, just very quickly, we're very aggressively pursuing the mini-split Phase 2 system to be submitted to Green Communities, and we've got a group of 5 of us that are all hands on deck trying to pull this thing together and have it happen for the October grant round.
Okay.
That's about it for now.
Future meetings, we have plenty to talk about. Town warrant closes on the 16th at 5 p.m. There is an MMA capital planning webinar happening on the 20th of September. I suggest people sign up for that. It's an hour and 15. The Associated Town Finance Committee meeting is scheduled for the 2nd of November at the Sharon Community Center. Again, I recommend members go. I'll be there. And special town meeting is not 7 p.m. That's my mistake. It's 5 p.m.
5 p.m.
That's what Facebook said from the town. That was the town that posted that. I always thought it was 7 p.m.
Usually is.
That was my thought, but I second-guessed myself. It's either 7 p.m. or 5 p.m. The town Facebook page posted a flyer that said 5 p.m.
It's on Facebook, it's true.
Exactly. But it is, regardless, it's on November 12th at some time, either 5 p.m. or 7 p.m. at high school. Upcoming meetings, 2 weeks from today, and then the 10th, we will have the Parks Commission chair in the room, hopefully, to present their bond proposal for special town meeting. All right, with that, any public comment from the committee? Any public comment from the public?
Room's full, nobody's gonna talk. Full of chairs.
Anybody want to make a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn at whatever time it is.
10:30 on the dot.
Second.
All right. Worried me. Motion's made and seconded. Any discussion? Fantastic. Roll call vote. Mr. Menard.
Aye.
Mr. Passios.
Aye.
Ms. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Simeoni.
Aye.
And an aye for myself. It's 10:31. We are adjourned. Thank you for sticking this one out, and good night.